I want you to picture a scenario that is uh, probably painfully familiar to anyone who works in today's professional world,
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
right? So you are sitting at your computer. You've just finished this massive project.
Like a huge milestone.
Exactly. Let's say it's a piece of back-end code you've been wrestling with for weeks. Or, I don't know, a really elegant restructuring of your department's workflow.
Or maybe a pricing model you built entirely from scratch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know it's brilliant. You feel that rare surge of actual professional pride.
Which is the best feeling.
It is. So you open up a platform like LinkedIn or Twitter or some professional forum. You stare at that empty text box.
And then the panic sets in.
Almost instantly, your hands freeze. Your stomach ties itself into a knot. You type a sentence, like really proud to launch, and then you just backspace.
You erase the whole thing.
Yep. You type here some thoughts on, and you backspace again, and then this wave of profound exhaustion washes over you, and you just close the tab entirely.
You choose silence.
Exactly. You choose silence. Because you, like the vast majority of us, have this absolute allergic reaction to the concept of self-promotion.
It just feels so icky, right?
It really does. But what if everything you've been told about the absolute necessity of relentless self-promotion is, well, fundamentally flawed?
That is the million-dollar question.
What if there is a completely different operating system for your career? Like an alternative that actually feels authentic and strips away all that dread of having to become this walking billboard.
Well, today our focus is exactly that alternative.
I am so ready to unpack this.
Yeah, we are exploring the foundational concepts of Austin Kleon's book, Show Your Work, specifically zeroing in on the first chapter, which is literally titled A New Way of Operating.
A completely new way of operating. I love that.
Right. In this deep dive, you are going to learn how to completely dismantle the transactional anxiety of traditional self-promotion
And how do we do that?
by shifting your focus entirely to the generous act of documenting your ongoing process.
Documenting the process instead of just shouting about the product.
Exactly. For anyone navigating business or freelance work or even corporate entrepreneurship, this is a required paradigm shift.
It really is. It changes everything.
It replaces that exhausting strategy of forcing yourself into people's feeds with the mechanics of becoming a magnet. Naturally drawing the right clients, collaborators, and employers to your work without ever having to shout for attention.
Okay, but to find that alternative, we first have to confront the monster in the room.
Let's do it.
There is a very specific piece of advice that acts as a shield for anyone who hates self-promotion.
I know exactly the quote you're talking about.
Yep. The comedian Steve Martin coined this legendary phrase, be so good they can't ignore you.
People literally tattoo this on their brains.
They really do. The premise is that if you just put your head down, ignore all the noise, and focus intensely on achieving undeniable excellence in your craft, the world will eventually beat a path to your door.
The idea that the quality of the work alone will act as its own marketing engine?
Right? Kleon tackles this head-on in the book. He agrees that you don't necessarily hunt down an audience, the audience finds you.
But he drops a massive caveat here that totally shatters that Steve Martin myth.
He states explicitly, it's not enough to be good.
And that phrase, it's not enough to be good, provokes a lot of defensiveness.
Oh, absolutely. People get really mad about it.
Because it attacks our deep-seated belief in a pure meritocracy. I mean, Steve Martin's quote is incredibly seductive.
It really is. Especially for certain types of people.
Exactly. It acts as the ultimate psychological escape hatch for introverts, deep thinkers, and makers. It essentially gives us permission to hide.
We desperately want to believe that the universe is this fair judge of talent, right?
We want to believe that if we toil away in secret, refining our skills to an absolute razor's edge, the marketplace will just magically sense our competence and reward us.
Like we emit some sort of genius frequency that employers can just detect.
Right. And by clinging to this idea, we excuse ourselves from the terrifying arena of public scrutiny. We completely avoid the vulnerability of the internet.
I mean, I understand the psychological comfort of that for sure. But I want to push back on the framing here just a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't there something genuinely noble about that purity?
Purity of the craft.
Yeah. If I am a software engineer and I am pouring 100% of my cognitive energy into writing the cleanest, most efficient code possible, rather than spending, 20% of my time tweeting about how great my code is, isn't that ultimately better for the product?
I see where you're going with this.
I just struggle with the idea that relying solely on extreme competence is somehow a bad strategy.
Well, it's not that the competence is bad, right? It's that competence in a vacuum is economically invisible.
Economically invisible. Wow.
Yeah. Your code might be flawlessly elegant. The goodness is an objective reality. But in the broader ecosystem of a career or an industry, unobserved goodness has zero leverage.
Because nobody knows it exists.
Exactly. Let's dissect the reality of the modern attention economy for a second. We are not living in a Renaissance village where the local blacksmith skill is obvious to everyone who walks past the forge.
Right. There's no open window to look into.
We are operating in an environment of unprecedented, deafening noise. I mean, every single minute, an avalanche of new tools, new agencies, and new talents enters the global marketplace.
It's overwhelming.
In this environment, being good is no longer a unique differentiator. Being good is simply the baseline entry fee to participate in your industry.
So if your flawless code is sitting on a private local drive, it cannot be utilized.
You cannot be funded, and it cannot advance your career.
It's the classic philosophical question, right?
Yeah.
If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound?
And in the professional world, the answer is a hard no.
A resounding no.
Right.
Relying strictly on being good without any visibility strategy is like, okay, imagine painting a generational masterpiece.
Okay, I'm picturing the Mona Lisa.
Right. You paint it, you lock it in your basement, you turn off all the lights, and you just sit there in the dark, hoping a billionaire art collector happens to break into your house, trip over the canvas, and hand you a check.
Which is completely absurd.
It's ridiculous. But that is the exact business plan for thousands of highly talented professionals.
It really is. The mechanism of discovery requires a surface area for people to grab onto.
You cannot wait to be discovered in the basement.
No, you have to actively build pathways that lead people to the work. Mastering your craft is a mandatory step one, absolutely, but visibility is the mechanical step two.
Okay, so if hiding in the basement guarantees obscurity, the only logical pivot is exposing what we're doing.
Which brings us right back to the initial dread we talked about.
Exactly. If we refuse to engage in gross transactional self-promotion, what is the actual mechanical alternative?
Well, Kleon frames this explicitly as a beginner's manual for a new way of operating.
And what's the heartbeat of this entire philosophy?
It's a total reevaluation of how we categorize our daily output. He argues for a massive shift from a product mindset to a process mindset.
Okay, the process mindset. This is where the tension begins to dissolve, I think.
Absolutely. But to understand the process mindset, we first have to diagnose why the product mindset causes so much anxiety.
Why do we freeze up when we try to post?
Because traditional self-promotion is almost exclusively tied to a finished product. You are promoting a published article or a finalized app launch or a completed marketing campaign.
You're presenting something that is done.
Right. And when you present a finished product to the marketplace, the relationship is instantly transactional.
You're making a demand of the audience.
Yes. You are demanding their money to buy the thing, or you are demanding their time to consume the final result.
Which is exactly why hitting publish feels so incredibly heavy. You're basically standing on a stage shouting, "Look at this perfect thing I made. Validate it. Buy it."
The stakes are incredibly high because the work is supposedly final.
Right. If they reject the product, it feels like they were rejecting the entirety of your effort, your whole identity almost.
Exactly. The finished product is a closed loop. The audience had no hand in it. They are just the consumers at the end of the conveyor belt.
So how does the process mindset change that?
It completely dismantles this dynamic. Sharing your process isn't a demand for validation. It is an open invitation for observation.
An invitation. I like that word.
When you share the unpolished, uncertain developmental stages of your work, you aren't asking anyone to buy anything. You are bringing them behind the curtain.
You are allowing them to witness the mechanics of your problem solving.
Yeah. Kleon actually references this great drawing in the book, sketched on a piece of aqua notes.
Oh, Aqua Notes, which, as a side note, is a waterproof notepad for the shower.
A brilliant invention, honestly.
It's a brilliant acknowledgement of where actual deep thinking happens. But anyway, the sketch is the classic iceberg metaphor.
Right, so picture an iceberg. You have this tiny, pristine triangle of ice breaking the surface of the water.
And that tiny tip is labeled the product.
Exactly. But underneath the dark water, there is a massive, sprawling, chaotic mountain of ice, which is labeled process.
And that physical proportion is accurate for almost every knowledge worker or creator out there.
The final deliverable is maybe, 5% of the actual labor?
At most. The submerged 95% consists of the dead ends, the raw research, the abandoned prototypes,
The frustrating debugging sessions, the sudden midnight epiphanies.
all the messy human stuff.
But corporate culture has historically demanded that we violently hide the underwater mass. We are trained to only show the polished tip in the boardroom or on our timelines.
Hide the struggle, show the results.
Right. But Kleon's thesis is that the underwater portion, the struggle and the evolution, is the exact human element that audiences and clients actually want to connect with.
Okay, I want to ground this in a real mechanical example because the phrase share your process can sound very, I don't know, vague.
It can sound like you just need to post pictures of your messy desk.
Exactly. And if I am a mid-level manager dealing with complex logistics, I don't have a visually pleasing, messy desk of sketches to show. I'm staring at data all day.
Right, there's no visual romance to it.
So how does someone in a highly abstract, non-visual role actually document their process without boring people to tears or just like posting screenshots of spreadsheets?
That is the critical hurdle for most professionals. The mistake is thinking process means a literal minute-by-minute diary of your keystrokes.
Like, today I open Excel.
Then I use the VLOOKUP function. No, that's terrible. Sharing your process in an abstract role means documenting your mental models.
Mental models.
If you are that logistics manager, your process isn't the spreadsheet itself. Your process is how you decided which variables actually mattered.
Okay, so what would that look like in practice?
So your dispatch to the world might be a short post saying, "We've been struggling with supply chain bottlenecks in the Midwest. I spent the weekend reading up on how the aviation industry handles cascading delays, and I realized we are modeling our warehouse buffers all wrong. Here is the framework I'm testing this week to fix it."
Oh, wow. That is fascinating because you aren't declaring victory at all.
Not at all.
You aren't saying, look at me, I solved the Midwest logistics crisis. You are saying, here is the problem. Here is the adjacent industry I looked at for inspiration, and here's the hypothesis I am testing.
You are inviting the audience to watch the experiment unfold in real time.
And observe the psychological difference for the reader. When you post a final report that says logistics efficiency increased by 12%, I might read it and say, oh, good for them, and move on.
It's totally sterile.
It's just a metric.
Mm-hmm.
But if you spend 3 months documenting the grueling trial and error of how you eventually achieve that 12%, I am emotionally invested in the narrative.
You've brought them along for the ride.
I understand the depth of your expertise because I literally watched you navigate the failures.
Yeah.
When the final product arrives, the trust is already established.
Yeah, exactly. The trust is baked in.
I totally see the value in that. But we need to address a massive point of friction here.
Let's hear it.
If we are exposing the underwater part of the iceberg, our mental models, our frameworks, our hypotheses, aren't we walking into a massive liability?
In what sense?
Well, Kleon explicitly talks about this in terms of letting people steal from you. He contrasts it with his earlier book, Steal Like an Artist, saying this new mindset is about letting others take your influence.
Right.
From a cold, hard business perspective, this sounds absolutely suicidal.
People get very protective of their IP.
Yeah. If I am a consultant and my entire value proposition is my unique methodology for solving corporate problems, and I start publishing that methodology for free on the internet, haven't I just handed my competitors my playbook?
That is the fear, yes.
Why would a client hire me if I just gave them the instruction manual for free?
This is the ultimate fear of the knowledge economy, the fear of making yourself obsolete through generosity.
Right. It's why corporate silos exist.
But the logic is fundamentally flawed, and Kleon brings in Jason Fried and David Heinemeier Hansen from Basecamp to dismantle it.
Ooh, the Basecamp guys? What do they say?
Their core advice for businesses is to emulate the operational model of world-class chefs.
Okay, emulating chefs. I know where this is going, but I have a major problem with this analogy.
Let's fight about it.
A chef can publish a cookbook with their secret recipe because the customer is fundamentally lazy.
That's entirely true.
The customer will buy the cookbook, realize beef bourguignon takes 48 hours to prep, give up, and just book a table at the restaurant to have the chef cook it.
They want the experience.
Exactly. The chef is selling a physical experience. But if I'm an accountant or a B2B consultant, my recipe is the meal. I am selling the knowledge.
You feel like the knowledge is the product.
If I give away my tax restructuring framework, a competing firm can just take it and use it. The analogy completely breaks down in white-collar work.
I completely understand why you see it that way, but I think you are conflating the recipe with the execution.
How so?
Let's look closely at what happens when a white-collar professional openly shares their framework. Let's say you are that brilliant tax accountant, and you publish a highly detailed 5,000-word breakdown of how to legally structure a specific type of offshore entity.
Okay, so I give away the farm.
You give away every single secret. You outline the exact tax codes. Yes, a rival firm could read it, a potential client could read it, but what is the actual mechanical result in the reader's brain?
They realize how to do it.
No, the client reads this incredibly dense, complex framework and realizes two things simultaneously. One, this problem is vastly more complicated than they initially thought.
Okay.
And two, you are the undeniable, absolute master of this specific domain.
Ah, I see. So you are using the complexity of the process as proof of your own indispensability.
Precisely. The client doesn't read the framework and think, great, I'll do this myself. They read it and think, if I try to execute this and get one single variable wrong, I go to jail.
I need to hire the person who wrote the manual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are not selling the secret. You are selling the flawless execution of the secret.
That is a massive distinction.
By out-teaching your competition, you establish a monopoly on trust. The competitor who hides their methodology is asking the client for blind faith. You, on the other hand, are providing empirical proof of your competence.
I really want to linger on this because it's a profound shift in how we view intellectual property in our daily lives. You're arguing that hoarding knowledge actually damages your authority, whereas distributing knowledge cements it.
It's counterintuitive, but it's true.
It reminds me less of a restaurant and more of the open source software movement.
That is actually a much more accurate mechanical metaphor for the knowledge economy.
Let's explore that. Because in open source software, a developer writes a foundational piece of code, and instead of patenting it and locking it away in a vault, they publish the raw, uncompiled code on GitHub for the entire planet to see.
They literally invite thousands of other developers to look at their logic.
To find the flaws, steal bits of it, build upon it. The fear would be that the original creator loses control and value, but the reality of open source is the exact opposite.
Yep. By allowing the community to stress test the raw code, the creator becomes the de facto leader of a movement.
The market relies on their architecture. And when enterprise companies need someone to implement a massive system based on that open source code, who do they hire at an exorbitant consulting rate?
They hired the architect who open sourced it in the first place.
The visibility generated the premium.
That is exactly how the process mindset functions at scale. When you share your methodologies, your recipes, or your source code, you aren't giving away your business. You are actively constructing your own authority.
You are proving you are the expert.
You are saying to the market, I am so confident in my ability to execute that I will show you exactly how the engine works. It projects extreme confidence, which is the ultimate magnet for high-value opportunities.
Okay, but let's ground this again in the specific anxieties of the listener, because there's another objection here.
Hate me.
What about the people who literally cannot share their code or their frameworks because of strict corporate compliance?
Ah, yes. NDAs.
Let's say I work at a major tech company. I am bound by ironclad non-disclosure agreements. If I take a screenshot of my messy desk, I might accidentally leak the geometry of the next iPhone and get sued into oblivion.
That's a very real concern.
Or, perhaps more commonly, what if my boss sees me posting about my workflow on LinkedIn and assumes I have too much free time and should be given more work?
Also a very real concern.
Right. How do we navigate the guardrails of sharing our process when we are legally or culturally restricted by our employers?
That is the reality for millions of workers. And it requires a very strategic approach to what you extract from your process. You have to learn the art of blurring the edges.
Blurring the edges? Meaning what?
You never share the proprietary data, the client names, or the specific product schematics. Instead, you share the meta process.
The meta process.
You share the genericized problem-solving journey.
Okay, give me an example of meta process, because that sounds a bit abstract.
Sure. Let's say you are a data scientist at a major streaming platform, and you just spent a month fixing a highly classified algorithmic bias in their recommendation engine.
You obviously cannot post the algorithm.
You cannot post the algorithm, you cannot post the user data, you'll get fired immediately.
Right.
But you can post about the tools you used. You could write a post saying, I've been working with massive data sets lately, and I realized my standard Python libraries were bottlenecking my query speeds. I spent this week migrating my workflow to a new indexing method, and here's how I organize my directories now. You are sharing highly valuable technical process knowledge that proves your competence, but it is completely divorced from the proprietary secrets of your employer.
You were sharing the sharpening of the saw, not the tree you were cutting down.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it.
And what about the boss who thinks you're wasting time?
Well, the framing there is crucial. You aren't tweeting or posting on social media, you are documenting internal best practices.
Oh, I see.
If you frame your process sharing as a mechanism for creating reference materials that could eventually benefit the wider team, it shifts from being a vanity project to a leadership initiative.
That reframing is incredibly powerful because suddenly it's not self-promotion, it's knowledge management.
Exactly. It's a benefit to the company.
Okay, once we understand how to safely extract and share these meta processes, we start building this public body of work over time.
And this is where it gets really exciting.
Kleon paints a very compelling picture of what happens when that body of work reaches a critical mass. He outlines a series of imagined scenarios in the book.
Right, the imagine section.
But instead of just listing them off, let's look at how these scenarios act as a sort of safety net across the entire life cycle of a career. Let's start at the very beginning.
The entry-level phase.
Yeah. You are a 21-year-old college student. You are facing the ultimate bureaucratic nightmare, the experience catch-22.
Oh, the absolute worst.
Every entry-level job requires 3 years of experience, but you can't get experience without a job.
It's maddening.
It is. How does process sharing bypass that HR filter?
Well, it completely circumvents the traditional architecture of hiring. Look at how HR currently functions. It relies on resumes.
And resume is fundamentally broken.
It is. It forces a complex, dynamic human intellect to compress itself into a static list of bullet points. It's essentially just a document of claims.
I am a strong leader. I am proficient in database management.
Exactly. And HR uses software to scan these claims for keywords. It is a lifeless, sterile process.
So how does the process mindset change that for a student?
Contrast that resume with a student who has spent the last 2 years of college actively documenting their coursework online. Instead of just handing a final architectural render to their professor for a grade, they spent 14 weeks blogging about their struggles with the CAD software.
They posted about the historical precedents they researched.
And the structural math they had to relearn just to make the model stand up.
Right. They aren't telling an employer they know architecture. They are providing months of undeniable time-stamped proof of how their architectural brain solves problems in real time.
Exactly. When that student sends a link to their documented process to a firm principal, the HR filter becomes completely irrelevant.
Because the proof is right there.
The principal doesn't need to guess if the student is curious, resilient, or capable of complex thought. The proof is alive on the screen. The student has literally manufactured their own professional experience before anyone gave them permission to do so.
So process sharing is basically the ultimate permissionless credential.
That's exactly what it is.
Okay, let's fast forward a bit. That student gets the job, they work for 10 years, they become a mid-level director, they have a mortgage, they have
The
kids,
stakes are much higher now.
much higher.
Yeah.
And suddenly the economy contracts, and on a random Tuesday, they are laid off. Their corporate email is shut off.
The dreaded Tuesday morning meeting.
In the traditional model, this is a moment of total panic. They have to start begging. They have to send out those agonizing LinkedIn messages like, hey, we haven't spoken since 2019, but do you know if your company is hiring?
It is so humiliating.
It is humiliating because traditional networking is inherently transactional. Most people only network when they need to extract value from someone else.
They treat their network like an ATM, but they've never actually made a deposit.
Wow. That's a brilliant way to put it.
But the next scenario Kleon outlines addresses this exact crisis.
Okay, how does process save you here?
If that mid-level director had spent the last 5 years generously sharing their frameworks, out-teaching their peers, and documenting their industry observations, the dynamic of the layoff is entirely inverted.
Walk through the mechanics of that safety net for us.
Over those 5 years, by consistently putting valuable process out into the world, they have built real equity with an audience of their peers.
People have used their templates.
People have learned from their mistakes. They have established a relational dynamic based entirely on generosity.
So they aren't strangers anymore.
Exactly. When the layoff happens, they don't have to send cold begging emails. They simply announce to their community, hey, I am transitioning out of my current role and looking for the next problem to solve.
And how does the network respond?
The network responds not out of pity, but out of enlightened self-interest. They already know the depth of this person's expertise.
Because they've been reading it for 5 years.
Right. The community actively wants to absorb that talent. The documented process acts as an insurance policy that catches them before they ever hit the ground.
This highlights a really crucial psychological shift. You are transforming your online presence from a static billboard into an active 247 employee.
I love that framing. An employee that never sleeps.
Right. When you share your process, your insights are out there working the room, demonstrating your competence and building trust while you are literally asleep.
You are divorcing your reputation from your physical presence.
But I want to make sure we don't fall into the trap of hypercapitalism here.
Yeah.
Not every listener is a corporate shark trying to optimize their career trajectory.
Thank goodness for that.
Right. What about the people who just have a weird niche interest? Does the process mindset apply if you aren't trying to monetize it at all?
It is vital that we address that because the monetization of every waking hobby is basically a modern disease.
It really is. Oh, you like knitting. You should open an Etsy shop.
Exactly. It ruins the joy. Kleon's final scenarios actually speak to the intrinsic human need for connection, purely for connection's sake. He asks us to imagine simply finding a community that shares our specific, obscure interests.
Curing the isolation of the craft.
Yes. Let's say your passion is restoring 1970s analog synthesizers. It is highly technical, deeply solitary work. You are hunched over a workbench with a soldering iron for hours on end.
If you only operate in the product mindset, you wait 6 months, finish the synthesizer and say, look at this keyboard.
And maybe someone says, oh, cool.
But if you operate in the process mindset,
You take a macro photo of a specific corroded resistor that you've been trying to bypass for 3 agonizing days.
right,
You post it to a niche forum or social feed with your technical notes. You aren't trying to sell the synthesizer. You are setting up a flare to see if anyone else on the planet understands the specific agony of that exact resistor.
you're looking for empathy, not a buyer.
And when a guy in Germany replies with a schematic that solves your exact problem, you haven't made $1, but you have found a peer. You have eliminated the loneliness of your specific obsession.
The return on investment of visibility isn't always financial. Sometimes it is purely about finding your tribe. It's sending a signal through the noise to find the other weirdos who care about the things you care about.
Exactly.
When you synthesize all of these scenarios, the student bypassing HR, the professional building a safety net, the hobbyist finding their tribe, it all boils down to one staggering realization.
What's that?
We have spent an hour dissecting the profound complexities of modern networking, intellectual property, and psychological dread. Yet, Kleon's thesis is ultimately a radical simplification.
It really is beautifully simple.
It replaces all the sweaty, awkward anxiety of traditional networking. Putting on a name tag, drinking bad coffee at a conference, handing out business cards, and trying to sound impressive.
Shudder.
With the quiet, sustained power of simply narrating your daily work.
If we step back and look at the architecture of this entire chapter, the new way of operating is a fundamental rewiring of our relationship with the public sphere.
A complete rewiring.
We are transitioning from an ego-driven transactional model to a generous relational model.
Transactional to relational.
The old way demands that you act like a hunter, constantly tracking down audiences, pitching them, and demanding validation for your polished products.
Which is exhausting.
The new way, sharing your process, out-teaching your competition, demystifying your frameworks, asks you to operate like an open-source architect.
You build a robust, transparent system.
You invite people to look at the wiring, and in doing so, you don't have to chase anyone. The transparency itself becomes the gravity that pulls the right opportunities, the right clients, and the right collaborators directly into your orbit.
That is the mechanical shift we all need to internalize. You aren't shouting. You are building gravity.
Beautifully said.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave the listener with a scenario to stress test their current reality.
Ooh, a thought experiment. Let's hear it.
Think about your absolute best professional skill right now. The specific capability that you execute better than anyone else on your team.
Okay, holding it in my head.
Now imagine your company ceases to exist tomorrow. The servers go dark, the doors are padlocked, and your current coworkers scatter to the wind.
A total reset.
Right. Who, outside of your immediate physical corporate bubble, actually has documented proof that you can do that skill? Who has seen the evidence of your mental models?
That is a terrifying question for a lot of people.
It is. Because if the honest answer is nobody, then you are living on incredibly dangerous ground. Your goodness is locked in the basement.
You are entirely dependent on a single corporate gatekeeper to translate your value to the world.
You are invisible.
It is a harsh diagnostic, but it is the necessary wake-up call to realize that obscurity is a vastly bigger threat to your career than someone stealing your ideas.
Exactly. Obscurity is the real enemy. So now that we understand the absolute necessity of tearing down the walls and exposing the messy underwater mass of our process to survive the modern economy,
The deeply practical question remains.
how do we actually curate that mess? How do we decide what is a valuable meta process versus what is just, oversharing our daily mundane tasks?
And how do we tell a compelling story about our work when we feel like imposters?
That transition from theory to daily execution is exactly what we will unpack in our next deep dive.
I want you to picture a very specific and probably very familiar scenario right now. You are sitting at your desk, it's late, the glow of the monitor is lighting up your face, and you are just staring at a blinking cursor.
Well, yeah, we've all been there.
Right? Or maybe it's not a cursor. Maybe it's a blank canvas or an empty business plan or, I don't know, a fresh timeline in your video editing software.
Exactly. The medium doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't, because the feeling is the same. You have an idea, a spark. You've even put some work into it, and it's sitting right there in front of you. But then, right as your finger hovers over the publish button, or right before you hit send to share it with the world, your stomach just drops.
That dread, that immediate wave of imposter syndrome.
Yes, a voice in your head whispers, who do you think you are?
Yeah.
You aren't a master at this. You aren't a genius. People are going to see right through this.
Yeah, and it's a totally paralyzing moment. I mean, It is the exact moment where millions of incredible ideas, businesses, and creative projects are they're quietly suffocated before they ever even get to take a breath.
Exactly. We completely freeze because, we all carry around this deeply ingrained, culturally reinforced image of what it means to be a creator.
Right. The lone genius myth.
Exactly. We picture the solitary genius. We imagine someone like a historical titan, right? Struck by a lightning bolt of divine inspiration, effortlessly producing this flawless masterpiece in total isolation.
Which is it's just so damaging.
It is. And because you were sitting there, in your sweatpants feeling confused and messy, you think, well, I don't have that lightning bolt, so I just don't have the right to share this. But what if I told you that waiting for that lightning bolt, waiting until you reach some, I don't know, mythical status of absolute perfection is actually the single biggest trap holding you back?
I would agree completely. It is arguably the most destructive psychological barrier in modern professional and creative life. I mean, we have erected this incredibly high, completely artificial bar called genius.
And we just use it as an excuse, right?
It is an excuse to exclude ourselves from the conversation.
Yeah.
We convince ourselves that we must be the absolute, definitive master of a domain before we are allowed to show our faces in public.
And that is precisely the myth we are going to dismantle today. So we are taking a deep dive into some really brilliant concepts originally articulated by the writer Austin Kleon. And we're going to look at how you can completely replace the crushing, impossible pressure of being a genius with honestly, the absolute freedom of being an amateur.
It's a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. And this is critical for anyone listening right now who is, trying to build a business, launch a creative project, write code, or just get noticed in their field. The old rules of hoarding your knowledge in a secret laboratory until it's perfect. They're dead.
Completely dead. Success today is about something entirely different.
Right. It requires participating in a network. It means embracing the messy, totally unpredictable process of learning out in the open and uncovering your unique voice simply by having the courage to actually use it.
Yeah. It requires a fundamental rewiring of how you view your own value. I mean, we are going to move the goalposts from an unattainable state of flawless perfection to a very attainable, very dynamic state of participation.
Which sounds so much better.
It feels better, too. And once you understand the mechanics of how this actually works, it changes the entire trajectory of how you build an audience, a career, and, frankly, a meaningful life.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start by looking at where this whole genius complex comes from in the first place, because it is just this pervasive, destructive myth. You know the narrative.
Oh, the romanticized, tortured artist trope.
Right. It's the idea that there are these rare individuals with superhuman innate talents who just, poof, appear out of nowhere. They supposedly have no influences. They just have this direct, almost divine connection to the muse.
Right. It's the narrative of the lone genius. And it insists that inspiration strikes them like a physical blow. A literal light bulb switches on above their head.
And then they disappear.
Exactly. The myth dictates their behavior. The genius retreats. They lock themselves away in a dusty studio or a sterile laboratory, and they toil away in absolute paranoid secrecy until the masterpiece is finished.
And only then, when it is utterly flawless, do they emerge from the mountaintop to present it to the world.
Yeah, and everyone else just stands around at the bottom of the mountain, gawking in awe.
Which, when you really look at the mechanics of that story, makes innovation seem like an entirely antisocial act. It's reserved for a handful of historical figures, and it leaves the rest of us entirely out of the equation.
It's so exclusionary.
Right. If you aren't naturally endowed with that godlike spark, why even bother trying to create anything?
Precisely. It creates a spectator culture. It separates the world into the gifted few and the passive audience. But if you actually look at the historical record, if you look at how great work is genuinely produced, that narrative completely falls apart.
It's just not true.
It's not. There is a much healthier and, frankly, much more historically accurate way of thinking about innovation.
Yeah.
Musician and producer Brian Eno coined a fantastic term for this. He calls it scenius.
Genius. Okay, so like the word scene and the word genius mashed together.
Exactly. Scenius. Under this model, great ideas are almost never birthed by one solitary individual operating in a vacuum. They are birthed by a complex ecology of talent.
And ecology, I like that.
Yeah, so Scenius is a collaborative group of creative individuals. So you have artists, curators, thinkers, theorists, critics, and even just highly enthusiastic fans who make up this interconnected, buzzing web of influence.
I want to dig into the history here because this is where the lone genius myth really gets exposed. Let's take someone who is universally held up as the ultimate lone genius. Albert Einstein.
Right, the poster child for solitary brilliance.
Exactly. The narrative is that he sat in a patent office alone, looked at a clock tower, and boom, he invented the theory of relativity.
It's a very compelling story,
Right.
but it completely ignores his genius.
Mm-hmm.
Einstein was brilliant, absolutely, but he was not operating in a vacuum. When he was developing general relativity, he hit a massive wall.
What do you mean?
Well, he had the conceptual physics idea, right?
Yeah.
But he literally did not have the mathematical tools to express it. He couldn't do the math.
Yeah, hold on. Albert Einstein couldn't do the math.
He couldn't do the specific non-Euclidean geometry required for the theory. He was stuck.
Wow. I had no idea.
Most people don't.
Uh-huh.
So what did he do? He didn't sit in isolation waiting for a lightning bolt. He turned to his genius. He reached out to his former classmate, a brilliant mathematician named Marcel Grossman.
Oh.
And Grossman introduced Einstein to tensor calculus, and they worked collaboratively. Without Grossman and without the broader mathematical community they were drawing from, general relativity as we know it wouldn't exist. Einstein was a node in a network.
That is fascinating. So even the people we put on the highest pedestals were actually just highly active participants in a scene.
Exactly.
They were looking at each other's work, bouncing ideas around, supporting each other, and honestly, blatantly copying and stealing from each other.
Oh, constant stealing. That's how art works.
Right. Think about the Paris art scene in the 1920s or the Homebrew Computer Club in the 1970s where Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were just hanging out with dozens of other computer nerds sharing circuit board designs.
Exactly. They were constantly contributing to and drawing from a shared pool of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging genius doesn't rob Einstein or Jobs of their achievement.
No, not at all.
It just contextualizes them.
Yeah.
It brings them back down to earth.
Yeah.
It proves that a breakthrough idea is the result of a mind connected to other minds. It is always a collaboration.
I love that framework because it immediately takes the pressure off. If you buy into the reality of the genius, it suddenly makes room in the story of creativity for you and me.
Yes.
It makes room for the rest of us who do not wake up feeling like superhuman deities.
And what's fascinating here is that it is an incredibly liberating shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Being a valuable part of a genius is not about your innate IQ. It's about your willingness to connect.
Right. It's participation.
Exactly. It shifts the internal question from, how smart am I? To, what can I contribute to this conversation? What ideas are you sharing? What is the quality of the connections you are making between other people's ideas?
But wait, let me push back on this a little bit because historically, a scene was geographical, right?
Yeah.
You had to physically move to Paris to be with the painters or move to Silicon Valley to be with the computer guys.
That's true. The barrier to entry was geographical.
Yeah. But today, our genius is the internet. It's blogs, forums, subreddits, social media platforms, And the defining feature of the internet is that there are no bouncers. There are no gatekeepers deciding who gets into the Paris salon.
Anyone with a Wi-Fi connection can enter.
Exactly. But if there are no gatekeepers, doesn't that just create a massive, deafening sea of noise? I mean, if I'm trying to participate, how does my work, or any quality work, actually rise to the top if everyone is just shouting into the digital void?
It's a very common concern, and it's valid, but it misunderstands the underlying mechanics of a decentralized network. The internet isn't just a giant megaphone. It's a hyper-efficient filter.
The filter.
Yes. When you have a massive ecology of talent without traditional gatekeepers, the curation doesn't disappear, it just changes form. It happens dynamically, governed by the community itself.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
Quality rises not because a single magazine editor or record executive decreed it was good, but because the community finds it valuable, shares it, links to it, and builds upon it.
Okay, yeah. It feels a bit like an open source software project. Like, let's look at something like Linux.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. Instead of one corporate tech genius locked in a basement trying to write millions of lines of perfect code, you have thousands of regular, everyday coders scattered across the globe.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And how does Linux ensure quality without a corporate hierarchy?
Well, someone might submit a patch to fix one tiny bug. Another person might write a whole new feature. They submit it to the network. It's messy at first, but they are all building it in the open.
In the open, that's the key.
Yeah, and the good code survives and gets integrated because other people test it, realize it works, and adopt it. The bad code just naturally gets ignored or rewritten. The community itself is the immune system that filters out the noise.
And if we look at the psychology of the open source contributor, it perfectly captures the mindset shift you need to thrive in any modern genius. Well, to survive in an open source community, you can't show up demanding an audience. You can't show up saying, look at my brilliant code, praise me. You have to stop asking what the network can do for your ego and start asking how you can be useful to the network.
Yes, you have to be a node that provides value, no matter how small, which leads to an incredibly practical yet profound takeaway for you listening right now. In order to be found, you have to be findable.
It sounds deceptively simple, doesn't it?
It really does. But it is completely antithetical to the old, exhausting model of self-promotion. I mean, the old model taught us that you had to build a flawless resume, print out glossy business cards, put on a suit, go to a physical networking event, and just actively push yourself into people's faces.
It was predatory and transactional.
Completely. The Genius model flips that entirely. It says stay in your workspace, do the work you are genuinely curious about, but simply leave the door open.
Leave the door open. That is such great imagery.
Show your work. Share your process. Talk about what you are reading. Post your half-baked theories. If you are consistently putting your authentic interests out there, making your digital footprint discoverable, you aren't wasting time networking in that gross traditional sense.
Right, you are building a magnet.
Exactly. You are letting the people who are obsessed with the exact same weird niche things find you.
You are allowing the algorithm of human curiosity to do the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah.
But, and this is but as we know, knowing you should leave the door open and actually doing it are two very different things.
Oh, absolutely.
This brings us right to the massive psychological barrier we mentioned at the start. The fear of not being good enough yet. The terror of being exposed as a novice.
Which brings us to the next massive paradigm shift we need to talk about. The unfair advantage of the amateur. Because the logical question is, how do you contribute to a genius if you don't feel like an expert?
Right.
And the answer is you stop trying to fake being an expert and you fully, unabashedly embrace being the exact opposite. You lean into your amateurism.
And this is tough because our modern culture has conditioned us to view the word amateur as a derogatory term.
Totally. It feels like an insult.
If someone calls your work amateurish, you feel insulted. We associate it with being sloppy, unprofessional, or just lacking talent. But if we look at the actual etymology of the word, it completely changes the context.
What does it actually mean?
Amateur comes directly from the Latin word amator, which means lover.
A lover, not a slacker.
Precisely. An amateur is simply an enthusiast, is someone who pursues their work or their hobby in the spirit of pure love, completely, regardless of the potential for fame, money, or career advancement. They are doing it because they cannot not do it.
That reframing changes everything. I mean, if you are doing something purely for the love of it, and because your mortgage doesn't depend on it being a blockbuster success, you have absolutely nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose.
And having nothing to lose gives the amateur a massive, unfair advantage over the hardened professional. Amateurs are willing to try anything.
They're fearless, in a way.
Yeah, they will experiment. They will follow their weird little whims down bizarre rabbit holes. And crucially, they will share the results without having a panic attack about ruining their personal brand.
Professionals, on the other hand, are often deeply trapped by the meta of their own industry.
Oh, that is so true.
Right. They have a hard-won reputation to protect. They have a specific proven methodology that pays their bills. They become victims of the sunk cost fallacy. Because they have spent 10 years learning how to do something the right way, they are terrified of looking ridiculous in public by trying a new way.
So they become conservative, they stop taking risks, they just iterate on what they already know works.
Exactly. The amateur does not carry that heavy baggage. They don't know the rules, so they don't know what rules they are breaking.
Ignorance is bliss.
It really is. Their raw, unfiltered enthusiasm allows them to make genuinely new discoveries simply by stumbling around and doing things in an unconventional way.
Think about Charlie Chaplin. I mean, arguably one of the most masterful, pioneering figures in the history of cinema. He essentially invented modern physical comedy on film.
A true master.
Right. And yet, he famously said, "That's all any of us are. Amateurs. We don't live long enough to be anything else." Even Chaplin, at the height of his powers, felt like he was just scratching the surface of what was possible.
It requires a profound level of humility to maintain that mindset, and it aligns perfectly with the philosophy of Zen Buddhism, specifically a concept popularized by the monk Shunryu Suzuki.
Oh, the beginner's mind concept.
Yes, he wrote, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few."
Let's break down the neuroscience of that for a second, because it's not just a poetic metaphor. It's how the brain actually works.
Okay, yeah, let's get into that.
When you become an expert, your brain creates highly efficient neural pathways for that specific skill. You literally train your brain to ignore outside stimuli so you can execute the task perfectly.
Right, it's about efficiency.
But that efficiency comes at the cost of neuroplasticity. The expert is literally neurologically blinded by what they know is supposed to happen.
They get tunnel vision.
Exactly. But the beginner's brain is highly plastic. It is completely open to the entire landscape because it hasn't built those rigid highways yet.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The beginner's mind can see the non-obvious connections because it hasn't learned to filter them out yet.
And we see this played out by some of the most successful artists in the world. Look at Tom York, the frontman for Radiohead.
Oh, great example.
They are known as one of the most innovative, experimental bands of the last 30 years. When York was asked in an interview what his greatest strength was as a musician, he didn't say his vocal range or his composition skills. He answered that, "I don't know what I'm doing."
Which sounds completely absurd coming from a multi-platinum artist, but it is a highly deliberate strategy.
Exactly. He actively cultivates that amateur state. When his songwriting starts to feel stale, or when he feels those rigid, expert neural pathways taking over, he will deliberately pick up an instrument he has absolutely no idea how to play.
Just to scramble the brain a bit.
Right. He'll sit down at a drum machine or a synthesizer he doesn't understand, just to force himself back into a state of ignorance. He forces himself back to the beginner's mind. John Lennon had a very similar philosophy.
Oh, the tuba quote.
Yes. He once said, "I'm an artist, man. Give me a tuba and I'll get you something out of it."
Because the specific tool, the tuba, doesn't matter nearly as much as the psychological willingness to be foolish.
Exactly.
It's the willingness to experiment and express raw, unpolished emotion. The professional might look at the tuba and say, "Well, I haven't taken 10,000 hours of lessons. I can't touch that."
But the amateur picks it up and makes some horrible screeching noises on the way to accidentally finding a completely unique melody.
Which perfectly sets up a crucial insight from the media scholar Clay Shirky. He was talking about the internet and the explosion of user-generated content. And he said something that I think should be printed out and taped to the monitor of anyone trying to create anything.
What did she say?
He said, "The stupidest possible creative act is still a creative act."
Oh, wow. We need to linger on that because the implications are huge. Shuki is pointing out that we fundamentally misunderstand the spectrum of value.
How do you mean?
Well, when we evaluate our own work, we think the spectrum goes from bad to good. And because we are terrified of landing on bad, we paralyze ourselves.
Right. If I can't write a Pulitzer-winning article, I just won't write an article at all.
Exactly. But Shirky argues that the real gap, the insurmountable chasm, is not between mediocre work and great work. The real gap is between doing nothing and doing something.
Yes. Going from 0 to 1. Moving from being a passive consumer of other people's content to being an active creator of your own content, even if it is objectively terrible, is the biggest, most important leap you will ever make in your life.
Mediocrity is still on the board. You are in the game. You exist in the scenius. Amateurs fundamentally understand that contributing a flawed something is infinitely better than contributing a perfect nothing.
So if we distill this into a practical takeaway for you, the listener, it is deeply actionable. Tomorrow, when you feel stuck, when you feel that suffocating professional paralysis creeping in, you need to deliberately go find a tuba.
Yes. Find your tuba.
Pick up a tool, a medium, or research a topic you know absolutely zero about. Force yourself to be an amateur. Wear that ignorance proudly on your sleeve, and most importantly, document and share that messy, confusing process of figuring it out.
But wait, this brings up a massive logical problem.
What's that?
If I take your advice and I start sharing my work as a proud amateur and I freely admit to the network that I have no idea what I'm doing, how on earth am I supposed to provide any actual value?
Oh, I see.
Right. Why would anyone pay attention to me? If the Scenius is about contributing value, how do stumbling amateurs teach or help anyone?
That is a fantastic question, and it leads us directly to the mechanism that actually powers the modern internet. It's peer-to-peer education.
Peer-to-peer.
Yeah, we assume that the only people who can teach are the world-class experts. But amateurs are lifelong learners, and because they make a point of learning in the open, their documentation of their failures and micro-successes becomes incredibly valuable to a very specific demographic.
Let's use the analogy from the author C.S. Lewis to explain this because it clarifies the psychology perfectly. Lewis observed that very often, two young schoolboys can help each other solve a difficult math problem much faster and better than the master teacher can.
Which seems counterintuitive at first. The master teacher holds all the knowledge.
Right. But Lewis pointed out that the fellow pupil can explain it better precisely because he knows less. The difficulty they are trying to untangle is one the first schoolboy has just recently encountered and overcome, maybe just 10 minutes ago.
It's a profound insight into cognitive empathy. The expert teacher met that same mathematical difficulty 40 years ago. They suffer from a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the curse of knowledge.
Explain the mechanics of that. What is the curse of knowledge?
So the curse of knowledge is a cognitive bias that occurs when an individual, communicating with other individuals, unknowingly assumes that the others have the background to understand.
They assume too much.
Right. But it goes deeper than just assuming. When you master a skill, as we discussed with the neural pathways earlier, your brain chunks information together. You literally forget the micro steps required to execute the task.
It becomes muscle memory.
Exactly. You cannot mentally simulate the state of not knowing. So when an expert tries to teach a beginner, they gloss over the foundational steps because those steps are invisible to them now.
Which leaves the beginner completely lost and frustrated. The expert says, just do X and Y, and the beginner says, wait, how do I even open the software to do X?
Right. The expert skips step 1 through 5.
And the schoolboy who just figured it out 5 minutes ago is the perfect teacher because he remembers the exact mental roadblock. He knows exactly which button is hard to find. So if we apply this to you, the listener, and your role in the digital scenius, sharing your specific current struggles, even if you are a total novice, is massively valuable to the person who is just one single step behind you on the path.
Exactly. You aren't trying to teach the masters. You are leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for the people right behind you. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the writer David Foster Wallace had a great definition of good nonfiction that applies perfectly here.
Oh, I love David Foster Wallace. What did he say?
He said good nonfiction is basically just a chance to watch somebody who is reasonably bright, but also reasonably average, pay far closer attention to something than most of us have the time or energy to do in our daily lives.
Just a reasonably average person paying close attention and thinking out loud. I love that. It lowers the bar so beautifully.
It takes the pressure right off.
You do not have to be a PhD or a definitive world expert on a topic to make compelling, highly valuable content about it. You just have to be willing to pay attention, document your average, messy process, and share your genuine thoughts.
But this raises an important secondary doubt. We've talked about coding and writing and music. Does this philosophy only apply to traditional creative or intellectual pursuits?
That's a great point. What if someone listening right now feels like their daily work is inherently boring?
Right. What if they are an accountant or a plumber or an administrator? How do they share their process when their process is spreadsheets?
That is the exact trap of thinking your life isn't content worthy. And there is a phenomenal real world example that completely destroys this excuse. Let's talk about Commander Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut.
Oh, this is such a good example.
Now, on the surface, being an astronaut sounds incredibly glamorous. But the reality of living on the International Space Station for months at a time is that a vast majority of the day-to-day work is not glamorous at all. It is highly technical, deeply repetitive procedural maintenance.
It's essentially extreme logistics and facilities management in zero gravity.
Exactly. But Hadfield understood the power of sharing his work. So during a 5-month mission, his sons helped him set up a social media presence. And he didn't just share the majestic photos of galaxies or the highly polished PR statements like the old Apollo missions used to do.
No, he got granular.
He filmed YouTube videos of himself doing incredibly mundane, everyday tasks. He showed the camera exactly how you manage to clip your fingernails when there is no gravity to pull the clippings down.
Which is strangely fascinating.
It is. He showed how you squeeze water out of a pouch to brush your teeth. He even filmed himself doing routine plumbing repair on the space station's toilet. And the result? Millions upon millions of people were absolutely captivated.
Because context and process are everything. When you just look at the final product, a working toilet, it's boring.
Extremely boring.
But when you show the constraints, the environment, and the human problem-solving required to fix it, it becomes a compelling narrative. Someone commented on one of his videos, I wouldn't normally watch live video of a couple of guys doing plumbing repair, but it's in space.
Huh. Exactly. The underlying action is mundane, but the human element of figuring it out makes it fascinating. It completely dismantles the excuse that my work isn't interesting enough to share.
Right.
If you are an accountant, maybe the spreadsheet itself is boring, but the psychological puzzle of how you untangle a messy client's finances is fascinating. Any process is compelling if you pull back the curtain and show the human struggle of doing it.
And this ties directly back to the amateur's advantage. Amateurs aren't afraid to share the messy middle because they have no polished facade to protect.
Professionals only want to show the glossy, finished product because they think that proves their worth.
But the genius doesn't want the polished product, they crave the process. So the highly actionable takeaway for the listener here is to look for the informational voids in your industry's community.
Informational voids.
Yes, pay attention to what the experts are not sharing, which is almost always the awkward, difficult, ugly process of actually doing the daily work, and fill that exact gap with your own amateur documentation.
Which brings us to a really raw, powerful story about how transformative this kind of sharing can be. There's a famous anecdote about Bernard Sumner, who went on to form the incredibly influential band New Order.
I know this story. It's so good.
Before that, when he was just a kid in Manchester, he went to a gig and saw the Sex Pistols play one of their very early shows. And his takeaway from watching them wasn't, wow, these guys are musical geniuses, I could never do that.
Not at all.
His takeaway was the exact opposite. He realized, they are terrible. They don't know how to play their instruments. I wanted to get up and be terrible with them.
That is the ultimate proof that raw, unpolished enthusiasm is a contagion. When you see a genius perform perfectly, it can actually be demotivating.
Yeah, it feels magical and unattainable.
But seeing someone else up on stage, being brave enough to be absolutely terrible in public, gives everyone else in the room psychological permission to try it themselves. It destroys the pedestal.
So if you take that leap, if you are out there documenting your amateur journey, being brave enough to be terrible in front of the network, it naturally leads to the most common piece of advice given to anyone trying to make a mark.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
It's on every motivational poster. And honestly, it might be the most deeply misunderstood piece of advice out there. The imperative to find your voice.
Find your voice. We hear it constantly in writing workshops, in, content creation tutorials, in corporate leadership seminars.
Everywhere.
And it causes immense paralyzing anxiety because the very phrasing of the command implies that your voice is an external object.
Right. It implies your voice is like a set of misplaced keys, and you have to go frantically searching for it out in the wilderness before you are allowed to speak.
Yes. I remember when I first started trying to create things online, I used to stress about this constantly. I thought I needed to invent a persona. I thought I needed to figure out if I was the funny, sarcastic guy or the deep, philosophical guy.
It feels like branding, right?
Yes. But the profound realization we need to discuss is that you cannot find your voice because it was never lost. It is not out there. It is already hardwired into the deepest parts of who you are. The only way it ever reveals itself to you and to the world is through the physical, consistent act of actually using it.
The television writer Dan Harmon has a quote that perfectly encapsulates the absurdity of finding your voice. He advises creators to just start making things.
What does he say?
He says, find your voice, shout it from the rooftops, and keep doing it until the people that are looking for you find you. The critical insight there is that the finding doesn't happen in a meditative retreat. The finding happens in the shouting. And here's where this concept gets really interesting and honestly incredibly moving. I want to share the story of the late, great film critic Roger Ebert because it proves exactly what a voice truly is.
Oh, this is a powerful example.
Ebert was a legendary broadcaster. He spent decades on television debating movies. But later in life, he was diagnosed with cancer. And to treat it, he had to go through brutal surgeries that resulted in the physical loss of his lower jaw. He lost the physical ability to speak permanently.
Just think about the psychological devastation of that. For a man whose entire livelihood, his entire public identity, was heavily tied to his spoken articulation on television and interviews and public debates, this is a catastrophic loss. The literal, physical instrument of his voice was gone forever.
But Ebert didn't disappear. To communicate with his nurses and his wife, he started typing on a Mac laptop. He would have the computer's synthesized voice read his words out loud. And more importantly, he started writing prolifically on his blog.
Because he couldn't stop participating in the scenius.
Exactly. He wrote about movies, yes, but he also wrote about life and memories and politics and mortality. And if you read Roger Ebert's writing from that specific period, his voice, his distinct humor, his deep humanism, his sharp, unforgiving critique, his pure, unadulterated love for cinema, it remained entirely 100% intact.
Amazing.
In fact, many people argue his written voice became even more resonant and powerful after he lost his physical speech.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It is a profound, beautiful illustration of what we were talking about. It proves that your voice is not a physical mechanism.
No.
It is not the sound your vocal cords make, nor is it a fabricated marketing persona. Your voice is simply an extension of what you deeply love and how your unique brain perceives the world. Ebert's voice survived the loss of his physical speech because his voice was fundamentally composed of his passion.
It proves that you don't sit down and construct a voice. It is an unavoidable byproduct of talking about what you care about. If you genuinely care about the subject matter, whether it's film criticism or woodworking or Python coding, your authentic voice will naturally bleed through the words, the code, the brushstrokes. You couldn't hide it if you tried.
Which brings us right back to the foundational concept of the amateur, the lover. If you approach your daily work as an amateur, driven by a genuine love for the subject, you never need to worry about sounding authentic. You are authentic. You are just being you.
Right.
But, well, we also have to be very realistic here. Otherwise, we're just peddling toxic positivity. Just because you are speaking authentically from a place of love does not mean everything you produce is going to be a masterpiece.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, most of it is going to be terrible.
Exactly.
And this is where we have to introduce a fantastic, highly practical concept to help us deal with the reality of producing work. It's called Sturgeon's Law. Theodore Sturgeon was a prolific science fiction writer in the mid-20th century, and he famously declared that 90% of everything is crap.
It's a blunt, somewhat cynical assessment of culture, but mathematically, it is incredibly comforting.
Comforting? How so?
Well, he was arguing that 90% of all movies made are crap, 90% of all books published are crap, and crucially, 90% of our own personal output is going to be crap.
But wait, let me push back hard on this. If 90% of everything I make as an amateur is absolute garbage, why on earth would I share it publicly? Doesn't that destroy my reputation?
Not necessarily.
Doesn't that just prove the voice in my head, right, that I'm a fraud? If I know it's probably crap, shouldn't I keep it hidden until I find the 10%?
That is the logical fear, but it ignores the fundamental problem of human self-perception. The problem is that we are notoriously comically bad judges of our own work. We don't actually know which 10% is the good stuff.
Oh, because we get too close to it.
Exactly. We obsess over the microscopic flaws in the brilliant 10%, convincing ourselves it's garbage.
Yeah.
And conversely, we fall deeply in love with the terrible 90% simply because we worked hard on it or because it feels clever to us.
That makes total sense. We lose objectivity.
Right. The artist Wayne White has a great quote addressing this exact dilemma. He says, "It really does need a little social chemistry to make it show itself to you sometimes."
Social chemistry, that is such a great
That
phrase.
social chemistry is the audience. It is the genius. This is the ultimate, undeniable argument for sharing your work consistently. Even when you are terrified, it isn't good enough.
Yeah.
You cannot accurately judge your own output in a vacuum. You have to get things in front of other human beings to see how they react.
The audience is the crucible.
Exactly. Their reaction, what they share, what they comment on, what they ignore completely, is the fire that burns away the 90% dross and reveals the 10% gold. You share the crap because you need the network to help you find the genius.
But the moment you tell someone they need to start sharing their work consistently to find this social chemistry, you immediately hit the ultimate, universally deployed modern excuse. The brick wall that stops everyone.
I don't have enough time.
Exactly. I'm too busy. I have a full-time job. I have kids. I have a commute. I'd love to be an amateur and a genius, but I just don't have the hours in the day.
It's the most common defense mechanism.
And we have to take a very hard line on this, because frankly, claiming you don't have time is a defense mechanism. We all get the exact same 24 hours. When highly prolific creators are asked how they find the time to do all the sharing, the honest answer is always, I don't find it, I look for it.
That distinction is vital. You don't find a solid, uninterrupted block of 3 free hours magically waiting for you on a Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist for anyone.
That never happens.
You have to actively scavenge for time. You have to hunt for it like a predator. You have to treat your time like loose change. You look in the nooks and crannies. You look in the cracks between the big mandatory events of your day.
You look at the 30-minute morning commute on the train. You look at the 15 minutes of your lunch break after you finish eating. You look at the 20 minutes after the kids are finally asleep, but before your brain completely shuts down.
And we have to sacrifice something? Yes, absolutely.
You might have to miss an hour of Netflix. You might have to wake up an hour earlier and endure the pain of a dark morning. But if you truly want to participate in the genius, if you truly want to reap the rewards of the amateur, the time is already there in your schedule. You just have to be ruthless about hunting for it.
It requires deep discipline, yes, but it is a discipline born of enthusiasm, not punishment. You are stealing moments from the chaos of life to do the thing you genuinely love, and then you are stealing a few more moments to share a piece of that messy process with the network.
So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of conceptual and practical ground here. We've traced the history of innovation. We've dismantled deeply held psychological beliefs about how creative work actually happens. And we've completely redefined what it means to be an expert.
We've covered a lot.
Mhm.
And if we synthesize all these different threads, the genius, the amateur, the peer-to-peer sharing, the discovery of your voice, I think it all points back to a single, incredibly empowering insight.
What's the core takeaway for you?
There is a quote from the comedian and writer John Cleese that captures the soul of this entire deep dive perfectly. He said, "Creativity is not a talent. It is a way of operating."
A way of operating, not a genetic lottery ticket, not a divine blessing, an operating system.
Exactly. The myth of the lone genius tells you that creativity is a rare, immutable trait bestowed by the gods upon a chosen few. If you believe that myth and you wake up not feeling like a genius, your only logical conclusion is to do nothing.
You forfeit before the game starts.
Right. But if creativity is simply a way of operating, then it is accessible to anyone. Anyone can download and install that operating system into their daily life.
And over the last hour, we've outlined exactly what the source code for that operating system looks like today. First, you completely reject the toxic isolation of the lone genius, and you step into the communal genius. You recognize that you are a node in a network, and your job is to connect and contribute.
Yes, shift from isolation to participation.
Second, you courageously embrace the messy, enthusiastic, rule-breaking spirit of an amateur. You do the work for love, you strip away the heavy armor of the professional, and you refuse to be afraid of looking foolish.
Pick up the tuba.
Pick up the tuba. Third, you commit to learning in the open, sharing your daily struggles and micro-victories to help the person who is just one step behind you. And finally, by doing all of this consistently, by ruthlessly scavenging time in the nooks and crannies of your busy day, you don't find your authentic voice, you forge it in the fire of the network.
You don't have to be a genius to start. You never did. You just have to be willing to participate. You just have to be willing to leave the door open and share.
I love that. So, bringing this all back to you, the listener, what does this actually mean for you tomorrow morning when you sit down at that desk and face that blinking cursor? We started this deep dive by asking, what if the false belief in genius was the very thing holding you back? Well, now that you know you don't need a lightning bolt to start, the fundamental question shifts.
The problem changes.
The tension is no longer about your innate talent. The tension is entirely about your courage. How exactly do you begin to share this messy amateur process with the world without feeling like a total fraud, or worse, without feeling like a narcissist who is just yelling, "Look at me," into the void?
It's a fine line.
It is a fine line, and I want you to mull that over. Let that question sit with you. Because navigating that exact tension, the line between authentic sharing and shameless self-promotion, is what leads us into the next great philosophy we need to explore. Learning to think about your work as a never-ending, observable process rather than a polished final product. Until next time, don't wait for the lightning bolt. Just pick up the tuba.
Imagine you need open heart surgery.
Okay. Not a great start to the day.
Right, definitely not a great situation. But, you were lying there on the pre-op table, the anesthesia is just about to kick in, and the surgeon walks in.
Yeah.
In that very specific moment, you absolutely want the polished, infallible, 10,000 hours expert holding the scalpel.
Oh, totally. You want the person who knows the rules so perfectly they don't even have to think about them.
Exactly. You want flawless execution.
Mm.
But, and here's the paradox we are tearing apart today. If you take that exact same flawless expert mindset and try to apply it to, say, building a business or launching a brand or really creating any kind of modern audience, it's actually the fastest way to become completely invisible.
Yeah, it really is, because we are so conditioned by, traditional education and corporate hierarchies to believe that competence requires this total facade of invincibility.
Right, like you can never show a weakness.
Exactly. We internalize this idea that you have to hide your messy drafts and conceal your uncertainties, and you only step onto the public stage when the performance is bulletproof.
Which is just exhausting to even think about.
It is. And the assumption is that people only pay attention to the finished, pristine product. But the mechanics of attention, and really of trust in the modern economy, they operate on an entirely different set of rules.
Which is exactly what we're getting into today.
Right, because that facade of flawless expertise, it's actually a massive barrier. It severs the connection between you and the exact people you are trying to reach.
Yeah, so today on the deep dive, we are looking at the sources surrounding Austin Kleon's concept of being an amateur. We're specifically drawing from Chapter 3 of his book, Show Your Work.
It's such a great chapter.
It really is. So for anyone listening who is, trying to carve out space in a crowded market, whether you are an entrepreneur, creator, or professional just trying to build some leverage, we are exploring why the people you admire most are actually succeeding, because they operate like professional amateurs.
Yeah, and we are going to look at the cognitive science behind why experts actually struggle to teach, and the evolutionary psychology of why we are just so terrified of looking stupid in public.
Plus, how sharing your messy, in-progress learning journey is really the ultimate structural advantage in a world that just changes so rapidly.
So to really understand the mechanics of this advantage, I think we have to look at the linguistic and historical roots of the word itself, like the word amateur.
Yeah, let's start there, because it has kind of a bad reputation, right?
It does. Over the last few centuries, and I mean, particularly since the Industrial Revolution, the word has been heavily stigmatized.
Right. If someone reviews your business proposal or like your software code today and calls it amateurish.
You either call it sloppy.
Exactly. They mean you lack refinement.
Right. But the etymology of the word paints a completely different picture. Amateur actually comes directly from the Latin word amer and the French word for lover.
A lover.
Yeah. So an amateur, by definition, is simply someone who pursues their work in the spirit of love.
Oh, wow. I love that. So they are operating totally outside the confines of strict professional incentives.
Exactly. The amateur is doing the work regardless of the potential for fame or immediate financial return or, vertical career advancement.
They're just obsessed with the material itself, like pulling it apart and putting it back together just to see how it works.
Yes, and that obsession, that intrinsic motivation, it creates a massive structural asymmetry when an amateur is competing against a rigid professional.
Wait, structural asymmetry. Break that down for me.
Well, the amateur basically operates with a fundamental lack of downside risk. Think about the established professional in any industry.
Okay, like a big corporate CEO.
Right. They have a legacy to protect, they have stakeholders, or maybe a board of directors demanding predictable quarterly earnings.
Right, they have an established brand identity that dictates exactly what they can and cannot do.
Exactly. So they are heavily incentivized to avoid failure, which means, inherently, they are heavily incentivized to avoid true experimentation.
Ah, I see. So the professional is basically forced to play defense,
Right.
while the amateur's playing purely on offense. They have nothing to lose.
Exactly. There's a quote by Charlie Chaplin that gets right to the heart of this. He said, "That's all any of us are. Amateurs. We don't live long enough to be anything else."
Man, that's good. We don't live long enough to be anything else.
Right. It points to the sheer impossibility of actually mastering the ever-expanding universe of human knowledge. I mean, the moment you declare yourself the absolute master of a domain, the domain shifts.
Yeah, technology changes or the market moves.
Exactly. The Zen monk Shunryu Suzuki described this cognitive trap perfectly when he discussed the concept of the beginner's mind.
I've heard of that. The beginner's mind. What did he say exactly?
He noted that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few.
Right. Because the expert thinks they already know the only right way to do it.
Yeah, and the psychology behind this is actually observable in how the brain processes information. When you become a recognized expert, you internalize the heuristics and the best practices of your domain.
So your brain is literally wiring itself to only see certain solutions.
Exactly. Your brain actively prunes away alternative pathways to optimize for the known, efficient route. Those rules act as cognitive blinders.
Wow. So you literally stop scanning the periphery for alternative routes because your neurological pathways have just heavily prioritized the established highway.
That is exactly what happens.
And I have to push back here a little. Stepping off that established highway seems incredibly dangerous for anyone whose livelihood depends on their reputation.
Sure.
Let's look at this from the perspective of a listener who is, trying to launch an independent consulting firm or a B2B service.
Okay, let's play that out.
The entire market premise for them is based on trust and authority. If a company is paying a premium for a service, they want the stoic professional who knows the rules, right? They don't want the enthusiastic lover of the craft who is just winging it to see what happens.
Right. Nobody wants to pay top dollar for a wild guess.
Exactly. So how does an amateur survive, let alone thrive, in a market that explicitly buys expertise?
So the distinction lies in separating the execution of a hard skill from the discovery and marketing of new value.
Okay, unpack that.
We are not advocating for structural incompetence. Like, if you are hired to manage a corporate tax audit, you absolutely must know the tax code.
But please know the tax code.
Please do. But the landscape of innovation and audience building requires a completely different posture than the landscape of just rote execution.
So being the expert in the audit doesn't mean you have to act like the rigid expert when you're growing the business.
Exactly. The professional consultant is often trapped by their past success. They are terrified of alienating their current client base or looking foolish at industry conferences.
So they only publish, like, safe, incremental, highly sanitized white papers that nobody actually reads.
Exactly. But the amateur, unburdened by that specific reputational fragility, can make massive leaps. They can openly test unconventional theories or combine disciplines that the professional considers unorthodox.
Okay, I have an analogy for this. Tell me if this works.
Let's hear it.
So the professional is kind of like a high-speed bullet train.
Okay.
It is incredibly efficient, it moves faster than anything else, and it carries a lot of high-paying passengers. But it is entirely restricted to a specific pre-laid track.
Right. It can only go where the tracks go.
Exactly. It can only travel where the heavy, expensive infrastructure has already been built. Whereas the amateur is more like an off-road explorer with a machete.
I love that.
They are moving slower, they are hacking through the jungle, they are getting covered in mud. The bullet train looks significantly more impressive from the outside, but only the person with the machete is ever going to discover brand new territory.
That is a perfect analogy. The train is a prisoner of its own infrastructure, just as the established business is often a prisoner of its own successful business model.
Right.
So when you adopt the amateur mindset, you are essentially stepping off the tracks. You give yourself permission to follow your curiosities without immediately requiring a return on investment.
Yeah, and if you are listening to this right now and you feel your work has become stagnant, the shift required is to stop masking your genuine enthusiasm behind that cold veneer of corporate professionalism.
Yes. Let the absolute geeky obsession you have for your subject matter become the forward-facing element of your work.
Which means we have to address the immediate consequence of hacking through the jungle with that machete.
Which is what?
You are going to take wrong turns. You are going to look messy. I mean, the defining characteristic of the amateur is that they are not paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes or looking ridiculous in public.
Right, because they operate with a completely different baseline for what constitutes a successful action.
Yeah.
There's a concept from Clay Shirky's work, Cognitive Surplus, where he posits this seemingly counterintuitive idea. He says, the stupidest possible creative act is still a creative act.
The stupidest possible creative act. Let's subject that to some scrutiny.
Let's do it.
Because on the surface, doing the stupidest possible creative act sounds like a recipe for destroying your professional credibility.
Sure, I can see how it sounds that way.
Right. If I publish a half-baked blog post full of logical holes, or I release a piece of software that barely functions, the market isn't going to applaud my creative spirit.
No, they'll complain.
Exactly. They are going to judge the output as substandard. So how is doing something stupid inherently valuable?
Well, Shirky is addressing the paralyzing nature of the 0-to-1 transition. The spectrum of human action is heavily skewed. Yes, the difference between mediocre work and masterful work is vast.
Sure.
But the true chasm, the space where the majority of human potential simply evaporates, is the gap between doing nothing and doing something.
Wow. Doing nothing versus doing something.
Right. Perfectionism is almost universally framed in corporate culture as a strength. People say in job interviews, my biggest weakness is that I have impossibly high standards.
Oh, yeah, the classic fake weakness.
Exactly. But neurologically and psychologically, perfectionism is actually an avoidance strategy.
Wait, really? An avoidance strategy?
Yes. It is a defense mechanism triggered by the amygdala to protect us from social ostracization.
Because in our evolutionary past, looking foolish in front of the tribe meant you might be cast out.
Right.
Which meant literal death. So we are carrying hunter-gatherer hardware into a modern digital economy.
Exactly that. If you never publish the newsletter, if you never launch the beta version of the app, if you never post the video, you remain entirely safe from the judgment of the tribe.
Right. The silent perfectionist preserves their internal narrative of genius because it has never been tested against reality.
Yeah, but they also remain entirely invisible to the market. The amateur intuitively grasps that contributing something, even if it is deeply flawed or rudimentary or naive, it forces an interaction with the real world.
It generates data.
Exactly. It generates data.
It's the stark difference between sitting in the comfort of your living room, harshly criticizing the plot holes of a massive Hollywood blockbuster, versus going out into your backyard and shooting a terrible zero-budget movie on a smartphone.
Yes. The person on the couch is completely insulated. Their aesthetic taste is impeccable. Their critique might even be academically flawless.
But the action is completely sterile.
Right. The person in the backyard shooting the shaky, out-of-focus video is engaging in an actual messy creative process. They exist in the arena.
And the person in the backyard is the only one actually learning anything.
Exactly.
Through the very act of doing it poorly, they're gathering tactile data about lighting, about the physics of movement, about editing timelines. The critic on the couch is learning nothing new.
So for anyone listening who is currently hoarding ideas, drafting endless outlines without ever publishing, you are choosing the safety of the couch.
Yeah, you have to recognize that your first podcast will have bad audio. Your first product will have unnecessary friction. Your first marketing campaign will likely fall flat.
But the strategic move is to put it out anyway, because the feedback loop generated by the stupid creative act is the only mechanism that leads to competence.
And sharing that messy journey, the actual process of moving from incompetence to competence, it creates a bizarrely powerful dynamic with the audience.
It really does.
Which leads into this concept of the amateur as the ultimate teacher. And this fundamentally flips how we think about authority.
Right, because we assume that the best person to teach a subject is the absolute master of that subject.
Naturally. You want the expert.
But amateurs who lack formal training and are actively figuring things out in real time often make vastly superior educators. They are lifelong learners who choose to process their education in the open.
The writer David Foster Wallace actually captured this dynamic when he described the mechanics of good nonfiction.
Oh, what did he say?
He said the most compelling nonfiction is essentially just watching someone who is reasonably bright, but also reasonably average, pay close attention to something out loud.
I love that phrase, paying close attention out loud. That is a phenomenal operational definition for building an audience today.
It really is.
And the reason the master struggles to teach and why the amateur excels at it really comes down to a well-documented cognitive bias known as the curse of knowledge.
The curse of knowledge. Let's dig deep into the mechanics of that curse.
Okay.
It's the idea that once we learn something, we literally lose the neurological ability to remember what it was like not to know it. So how does that actually manifest when a business leader or a creator tries to communicate with their market?
Well, it manifests as a total breakdown in empathy. When you acquire expertise, your brain actually undergoes physical changes.
Physical change.
Right.
Real.
Yeah. Through a process called myelination, the neural pathways associated with that skill become heavily insulated and incredibly fast. You begin to chunk complex microsteps into a single automated action.
Wow.
So if you ask a grandmaster chess player why they made a specific move, they might struggle to articulate the 20 microcalculations they made, because to them, the board simply looked a certain way.
They have totally automated the underlying logic.
Exactly. So when an expert tries to teach a beginner, they skip over the foundational, agonizing microsteps because their brain no longer consciously registers those steps as difficult.
So if I ask a Michelin-star chef how to finely dice an onion, they might just say, oh, you just hold it like this and chop it, because their hands have performed that motion 10,000 times.
Right. Their muscle memory is entirely unconscious.
But the amateur who just watched a YouTube tutorial yesterday on how to curl their knuckles to avoid slicing their fingers off,
Yeah.
that amateur knows exactly the specific granular fear the beginner is experiencing today.
This was articulated beautifully by the author C.S. Lewis. He wrote that the fellow pupil can often help more than the master because the fellow pupil knows less.
That sounds backwards, but it makes so much sense.
Right. The specific difficulty the beginner needs explained is one the fellow pupil has recently encountered and overcome. The expert met that same difficulty decades ago and has completely forgotten the texture of that struggle.
But let me bring in the perspective of the startup founder or the independent contractor who is listening to this right now.
Okay, let's hear the pushback.
If I embrace this fellow pupil mindset and I start learning in public meaning, I am openly broadcasting my bad code, my failed marketing campaigns, my struggles to figure out my pricing model. Aren't I just handing my competitors ammunition?
Yeah.
And more importantly, if I am trying to secure a Series A funding round or land a massive enterprise client, doesn't broadcasting my ignorance actively destroy the trust I need to close the deal? I mean, investors want a sure bet, not a fellow pupil.
That is the most common and rational objection to this entire philosophy.
Because it feels risky.
It does, but it completely misunderstands what sophisticated investors and clients are actually evaluating. There is a critical difference between structural incompetence and process vulnerability.
Structural incompetence versus process vulnerability. Define those.
Structural incompetence is delivering a broken product and shrugging your shoulders.
Right. Oops.
Exactly. Process vulnerability is saying, we deployed this feature, the engagement metrics tanked by 20%. Here is our analysis of why our initial hypothesis was wrong, and here is how we are iterating the model today.
Oh, so you are narrating the pivot. You aren't just showing the failure. You are showing the machinery of how you process failure.
Precisely. Investors know that the initial business model almost always fails. They are not investing in omniscience.
Right.
They are investing in adaptability, resilience, and the speed of the founder's learning loop. When you learn in public, you are providing a real-time, transparent audit of your learning loop.
You are proving that you can take a hit, analyze the data, and adapt.
Yes. Furthermore, a modern audience, whether that is a customer base or an investment board, they crave the fellow pupil because it humanizes the interaction.
Yeah, a founder building in public, wrestling with customer acquisition costs and supply chain issues out loud, provides infinitely more actionable value to their peers than a billionaire giving highly sanitized, ghost-written advice from a private jet.
Absolutely. Because the billionaire is giving advice from an environment that simply does not exist for the beginner. The capital constraints are different, the risk profiles are completely different.
So if you are listening to this and wondering how to position your content, the shift is to stop trying to shout instructions from the summit of the mountain.
Right.
Document your daily incremental learnings. Teach from halfway up the trail, reaching a hand down to the person who is just one step behind you. You do not need to be the ultimate guru. You just need to be a slightly more experienced fellow pupil.
And The fascinating byproduct of reaching that hand down is what it does to the broader culture around your work. You stop merely transmitting information and you begin to actively catalyze movement in others.
Catalyze movement.
Yeah. We see this in the contagion of raw enthusiasm.
There is an incredible historical anecdote about this in the source material, actually. It involves the band New Order.
Oh, right, with Bernard Sumner.
Yeah, the frontman, Bernard Sumner, talks about the very first time he saw the Sex Pistols play live. He observed them on stage, and his takeaway was, they were terrible. I wanted to get up and be terrible with them.
That reaction highlights the profound psychological difference between being intimidated by genius and being activated by amateurism.
Activated by amateurism.
Yes, because when we encounter flawless, polished expertise, a virtuoso classical musician, or a perfectly rehearsed, highly produced corporate keynote, our primary reaction is awe. We respect the sheer mastery on display.
But awe is often an alienating emotion.
Exactly. The absolute perfection creates a glass wall between the creator and the audience. The observer thinks, I could never possibly achieve that level of flawless execution, so there's no point in me even attempting to enter the arena.
It is the feeling of walking into the Louvre and staring at a masterwork of Renaissance sculpture. You don't look at the marble and immediately think, I'm going to head to the hardware store, buy a chisel, and give this a shot in my garage.
No, you absolutely do not.
The sheer scale of the mastery makes you feel incredibly small.
But raw enthusiasm completely bypasses that intimidation reflex. When you see someone who is unpolished, who is clearly struggling with the mechanics, but who is passionately, joyfully obsessed with what they are doing, it functions as an open invitation.
It shatters the psychological barrier to entry.
Right. The observer looks at the amateur and thinks, they clearly don't have all the answers, their technique is flawed, but they are having an incredible time doing it. Maybe I have permission to try this too.
So the Sex Pistols analogy is perfect for understanding the origins of the punk rock movement. But translating wanting to be terrible with them into a corporate or B2B environment requires some translation.
It does.
Because if I am a software developer or a freelance graphic designer or financial advisor, I certainly don't want my audience or my clients to think I am terrible at managing their money or building their website.
Right. That would be bad for business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how does this contagion of enthusiasm apply when the stakes involve people's livelihoods?
Well, in a professional context, it is not about manufacturing incompetence or desiring to be perceived as terrible. It is about shifting the focal point of your public presence from your prestige to your passion.
Okay, prestige to passion.
Yes. This is the underlying mechanics of true community building. You do not build a rabid, fiercely loyal community by acting like an impenetrable, flawless corporate monolith. You build it by demonstrating a profoundly human obsession with a shared interest.
So for a software developer, that might mean live streaming yourself, attempting to learn a brand new programming framework.
Exactly. You might get completely stuck on a syntax error for 30 minutes, frantically searching documentation and laughing about it with the people in your chat. You are showing the messy desk. You are showing the failed iterations and the dead ends.
Yes. You are inviting your audience to join you in the trenches of the creative process, rather than demanding they sit quietly in the stands and applaud only when the finished product is unveiled.
Right.
The people who sit in the stands are just consumers. The people who get in the trenches with you become advocates, collaborators, and ultimately your most resilient market base. The enthusiasm is the actual magnet, not the polish.
And leaning into that amateur mindset isn't just a clever tactic for marketing. In the current economic reality, it is a mandatory survival mechanism.
Oh, 100%.
We are operating in a landscape where technological disruption is constantly forcing amateurism upon us, regardless of our past achievements. Yeah, the half-life of a learned skill is shrinking exponentially.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the impact of artificial intelligence or shifting global supply chains, the tools of every trade are being rewritten every few years.
Well, it's constant.
The text highlights a brilliant strategy for navigating this, actually, utilized by Tom York, the frontman of Radiohead.
Oh, right, the Tom York example. Tom York was once asked in an interview what he considered his greatest strength to be. And for a globally revered, critically acclaimed musician, his answer was incredibly revealing.
What did he say?
He said his greatest strength is that I don't know what I'm doing.
Wow.
The source material notes that whenever York feels his songwriting process is becoming too comfortable or his patterns are becoming stale, he will purposefully abandon his primary instruments and pick up something he has absolutely no idea how to play. just to force his brain back into a state of discovery.
That is fascinating. And we also see this sentiment echoed by John Lennon, who famously said, "I'm an artist, man. Give me a tuba and I'll get you something out of it."
A tuba.
A tuba. What both York and Lennon are aggressively demonstrating is the separation between artistic intent and the mere mastery of a tool.
Okay, so unpack that a bit.
If your entire professional identity is tethered to your expertise in one highly specific tool, say, you are the world's foremost expert in a specific legacy software system or a specific social media algorithm, you are incredibly fragile.
Right. The moment that tool is rendered obsolete, your entire foundation of expertise vanishes overnight.
Exactly. But the amateur focuses on the underlying intent. They view the tool as secondary. They will pick up a tuba or a new coding language or a new distribution platform and figure out how to express their core value through it.
It is the strategic deployment of beginner's constraints.
Yes.
Imagine a highly seasoned CEO who has been running a massive logistics company from the executive boardroom for a decade.
Yep.
They're insulated by data dashboards and executive summaries.
Right, they see everything from 30,000 feet.
Exactly. But if that CEO decides to step down and spend a full week working the frontline customer service phones, they're purposely stripping away their executive authority.
Yeah.
They have to learn the clunky new phone system. They have to de-escalate angry customers in real time.
They have to experience the actual friction points of the company without any filters.
Yes, they are aggressively forcing themselves back into the beginner's mind because the view from the boardroom has become too static and sanitized to reveal the truth.
That is the absolute essence of a strategic reset. When the work feels rote, when you are relying entirely on muscle memory, your cognitive processes literally begin to atrophy.
Yeah.
You must purposefully introduce a new, unfamiliar constraint to shock the system. It forces your brain out of its automated expertise and back into active, high-alert problem-solving mode. You have to willingly become the fool in order to continue evolving as the master.
So if you're listening to this right now, the immediate application is to audit your own professional comfort zones. Where are you relying too heavily on your past credentials? What is the tuba in your industry right now?
Yeah, maybe a new technology or a new platform.
Or a completely different methodology that you have been avoiding simply because you don't want to endure the discomfort of not knowing how to play it. The directive is to pick it up. Make some terrible noise with it. Give yourself the grace to be a beginner again.
Because when we pull all of these threads together, a very clear paradigm shift emerges. We have been taught to view expertise as a static destination, a locked room that you eventually earn the key to.
Right.
But amateurism is an active, perpetual engine of discovery. When you wear your amateurism proudly, when you let your curiosity and your genuine love for the work be the loudest signal you broadcast, you naturally disarm the market. You invite the world into the process.
You stop trying to uphold the exhausting illusion of the impenetrable master, and you embrace the reality of being a fellow pupil. You commit to learning out loud. And in doing so, you naturally fill the massive voids left by secretive, paranoid experts who are too terrified to show their messy process. You don't have to rely on aggressive outbound marketing to find an audience. By enthusiastically and transparently sharing what you love, the people who love the exact same things, who are energized by that same curiosity, will naturally find you.
So take a hard look at the experts and the thought leaders you admire most in your field today, the ones who are truly moving the needle. Are you currently exhausting yourself trying to imitate their polished, highly produced final products?
Yeah.
Or are you willing to do the brave, deeply uncomfortable work of imitating how they actually started? Ask yourself, what is a complex problem in your industry that everyone else is secretly struggling with but is too proud to admit they don't understand?
Oh, that's a great question.
And how can you become the amateur brave enough to start exploring that exact problem out loud?
That is where you grab the machete. You step off the high-speed train of established expertise, and you start hacking your own path through the jungle. Now that you understand the immense power of being an amateur, the immediate logistical question is, how do I actually share this messy, in-progress work without completely overwhelming my audience or drowning them in uncurated noise? Well, that is exactly what we will be unpacking on our next deep dive, where we explore how to scoop up the scraps of your daily process and turn the invisible labor of your work into something unforgettable. We spend our entire lives agonizing over this nebulous concept of finding our voice, right?
Oh, constantly, yeah.
Like before we ever dare to actually speak up, we treat it as this this ultimate prerequisite.
Yeah, like you need a permission slip from the universe or something before you can hit publish.
Exactly. Or before you can hit record
Yeah.
or, just share anything. But, I mean, what if the exact opposite is true?
Right?
What if staying silent, like waiting in the shadows, for this perfect voice to just magically materialize?
Which it never does.
Which it never does.
Yeah.
What if that guarantees that you will never find it?
That is such a terrifying thought, but it is so true.
And you know that exact feeling, right? Like you are sitting there staring at a blank screen or a
Oh,
blank piece of paper or, the blinking red record button on your camera, and you are just completely paralyzed.
completely frozen.
Yeah.
Because you tell yourself, I can't put this out into the world yet.
Yeah. I haven't found my voice.
Mhm.
It's not perfectly me yet.
Exactly. You feel this immense, crushing pressure to just like arrive fully formed.
Yes. To step into the business or creative world with this perfectly polished, utterly unique identity right out of the gate.
Which is impossible.
It really is. But today, we are going to completely shatter that assumption.
We are, and that is the exact mission of today's deep dive.
Yes, it is.
We are exploring a stack of notes from Austin Kleon's brilliant work, Show Your Work.
Such a good text.
It really is. And specifically, we are zeroing in on a pivotal, paradigm-shifting chapter titled, You Can't Find Your Voice If You Don't Use It.
I love that title. It's just so direct.
It hits you right in the face. And for anyone interested in business or entrepreneurship or really any kind of creative endeavor, there is a harsh reality you need to understand.
Right.
In the modern landscape, visibility equals existence.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Today, you're going to learn why your voice is not something you just, discover in a vacuum.
Not a buried treasure.
Exactly. It is not some hidden treasure buried deep inside your psyche waiting to be unearthed. It is a tool.
A tool.
And it is a tool that you can only build in public through the messy, vulnerable act of sharing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Austin Kleon himself makes a very personal and, frankly, very comforting admission right at the start of this text.
He really does.
He says that when he was younger, he never really knew what people meant when they said, find your voice.
Yeah, he worried constantly about it.
Constantly. He agonized over whether he actually had his own voice. And I mean, I think that is so universally relatable.
Oh, 100%.
We tend to treat our voice like a set of lost car keys.
Yes, that is exactly how it feels.
Right. We act like we have to flip over the couch cushions of our soul, digging around in the dark.
Looking for the keys.
Yeah, like for the keys. And we tell ourselves that we cannot possibly start the engine and drive until we find those exact pre-existing keys.
Well, why do we do that? It seems like such a convenient excuse.
It is an excuse. Because if we convince ourselves that our voice is just lost, well, it absolves us of the responsibility of doing the hard work of speaking today.
Right. I can't drive the car. I lost the keys.
Exactly. If I haven't found the keys, well, you can't blame me for not driving, right?
What's fascinating here, though, is that Kleon realizes the fundamental flaw in that lost car keys metaphor.
Yeah, he completely turns it around.
Through his own journey, he discovers that the metaphor itself is actually what keeps us trapped.
Wow. Okay, break that down for me.
Well, your voice isn't a separate object that you misplace. As Kleon points out, it is actually hardwired.
Hardwired.
Yes, it's built into you. You don't find it lying around somewhere. It is something that follows the act of talking about what you love.
So it's a byproduct.
Exactly. It is a byproduct of action, not a precursor to it.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
The societal expectation, the one that causes that paralysis you described earlier.
Yeah, the blank screen panic.
Right. That expectation is that you must be fully baked before you serve yourself to the world.
Like you have to be a finished product.
Exactly. But Kleon is arguing that the oven is the world.
Wait, I want to linger on that for a second because that idea that the oven is the world, that completely flips how we usually think about preparation.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. We usually think of the studio or the office or our private journal as the oven.
We think we bake in isolation.
Exactly. We think we sit in a dark room until we're perfect. But if the world is the oven, that implies you actually need the friction of the outside environment to form your shape.
Yes. A loaf of bread doesn't bake sitting on the kitchen counter.
Right. It needs the heat.
And the heat, in this case, is the audience.
The feedback.
The feedback. It's the act of placing your raw, unformed ideas into a public space and letting the environment react to them.
You literally cannot find your shape if you don't subject yourself to that heat.
Precisely. The heat of public interaction is what catalyzes the chemical reaction of your voice.
Without it, you just remain dough.
You're just raw dough. And to illustrate the mechanics of how this actually works, the text brings in this incredibly powerful quote from Dan Harmon.
Oh yeah, the Dan Harmon quote.
Harmon says, "Find your voice, shout it from the rooftops, and keep doing it until the people that are looking for you find you."
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because when I hear the phrase shouting from the rooftops, especially considering the digital landscape we all operate in, my immediate reaction is just a kind of exhaustion.
I get that. It sounds loud.
It sounds so loud. Doesn't that just create more noise? I mean, we are already living in an environment where everyone is shouting at the top of their lungs across every platform.
That is very true.
Right. If you just start shouting from the digital rooftops, aren't you just contributing to the deafening roar?
It's a valid fear.
I just struggle to see how adding to the cacophony helps you build a business or, find a meaningful audience.
That is the natural fear, and it's a totally valid one. But this raises an important question, right? What is the mechanical difference between noise and signal?
Noise and signal. Okay.
If you read Harmon's quote closely, in the context of Kleon's broader argument, it's not about making random chaotic noise just to be loud.
Okay. So it's not just yelling for attention.
No, not at all. It's about broadcasting a very specific signal. Harmon says to keep doing it until the people that are looking for you find you.
Until the people looking for you find you.
That phrasing is vital.
Yeah.
It implies that there's a specific group of people, an audience, a customer base, a community of peers.
Somewhat out there.
Yes. A group that is actively searching for the exact frequency you are capable of broadcasting.
Ah. Okay. So you aren't shouting to force people who don't care to listen to you.
Exactly.
You aren't trying to interrupt people's days. You are shouting at the people who want to listen to you.
The ones who need it?
Right, the people who actually need your specific perspective. You're shouting so they know where you are geographically located in the network.
Exactly. Think of it like a lighthouse.
Ooh, a lighthouse. I like that.
Right. A lighthouse isn't shouting to annoy the ocean.
Right, it's not trying to wake up the fish.
No, it is shining a bright, relentless beam so that ships looking for a safe harbor can orient themselves.
That makes perfect sense.
If you are whispering or if you are completely silent because you are so afraid of adding to the noise, the people who are desperately looking for your specific product or your art or your methodology,
They will never find you.
they will never find you. You are effectively denying them the chance to connect with you.
Wow.
Broadcasting your signal isn't an act of ego. It is an act of service to the people who are searching for it.
That reframes the entire concept of self-promotion.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. If you view sharing your work as an act of service, that paralysis we talked about earlier, it starts to fade.
Because it's not about you anymore.
Exactly. Because if you sit around waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for this mythical epiphany where your brand identity is just handed to you on a silver platter
You are going to be waiting forever.
forever, your voice isn't the starting line. If you talk about the things you love consistently and publicly, the voice will naturally emerge as the residue of that sharing.
Yes, the residue.
Yeah.
I love that word for it.
You don't invent it in a vacuum. You allow it to happen through the mechanical act of speaking.
And that mechanical act of speaking, that act of putting your signal out there, it is not treated as a casual suggestion in this chapter.
No, it's really not.
It is framed as an absolute, uncompromising necessity.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Kleon transitions from this, somewhat theoretical discussion about the mechanics of a voice in lighthouses to the absolute life or death urgency of it.
It gets very real very fast.
It does. He anchors this entire philosophy by telling the story of the late film critic Roger Ebert.
Such an incredible story.
It is. And we really need to sit with this story because I think it changes everything about how we view our daily work.
It is the emotional and philosophical core of the text. Roger Ebert was a man whose entire livelihood, his entire identity in the public eye, was built on his physical voice.
Right. He made a living talking on television.
He debated, he criticized, he passionately discussed cinema with his colleague Gene Siskel.
They were iconic.
His vocal cords were his primary instrument, and then he went through several incredibly intense surgeries to treat his cancer.
And the physical reality of those surgeries, as described in the text, is just devastating.
It's heartbreaking.
He permanently lost his physical ability to speak. He lost his physical voice. I mean, imagine that.
It's hard to even fathom.
This giant of broadcasting, a man who commanded rooms and television screens with his tone and his cadence. He couldn't say a single word.
Not a single word.
To communicate with his own family, his friends, his nurses, he was reduced to scribbling on a notepad or typing on his Mac and having that awkward robotic computer voice read his words out loud through the laptop speakers. And I want to really think about the psychological toll of that. If your primary tool for interacting with the world, the very thing that makes you you, in the eyes of millions,
It's just gone.
is just surgically removed overnight. I mean, my instinct, and I think the instinct of almost anyone, would be to retreat.
It is the most natural human instinct imaginable.
Right. Just hide.
If you lose the very tool of your trade, the temptation to go quiet, to mourn the loss in absolute silence, it has to be overwhelming.
I would probably just fade into the background.
Most people would. They would view the loss of the physical voice as the end of their relevance.
Yeah, that their time was over.
But what did Roger Ebert do?
He definitely didn't retreat.
Did he retreat? Absolutely not. He did the exact opposite. He blogged.
He blogged so much.
He blogged relentlessly with a ferocity that stunned people.
Yeah, he poured his thoughts, his movie reviews, his observations about life, his memories, just out onto the internet.
But why?
That's what I keep asking myself when reading this. Why do that? When you are battling cancer, when you are dealing with the physical exhaustion of recovery, and you have lost the very medium you are famous for, why force yourself to type out thousands of words on a blog?
Right. It's not like he needed to build his resume at that point.
No, he was already a legend.
He did it because he understood the existential urgency of expression.
Existential urgency.
Okay.
There.
He recognized that while the physical mechanism of his voice was gone, the need to voice his internal world remained.
This is still there.
The text highlights a profound observation from journalist Janet Maslin, who watched Ebert during this relentless blogging period.
Oh, I love this quote.
It's so powerful. She wrote, "Mr. Ebert writes as if it were a matter of life and death, because it is."
That line gives me chills every time I read it. As if it were a matter of life and death, because it is.
Yeah.
It implies that for Ebert, the writing wasn't a hobby. It wasn't just to pass the time. It was a life support system.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Kleon draws a very stark, unyielding conclusion from Ebert's behavior.
That's the conclusion.
Ebert didn't blog to pass the time. He didn't blog to maintain a brand presence.
Right.
He blogged because he knew his time on this planet was short, and he had a fundamental, desperate human drive to share everything he could in the time he had left.
Wow.
Kleon states that Ebert blogged because it was a matter of being heard or not being heard. It was quite literally a matter of existing or not existing.
Existing or not existing, that is the core of it all.
It really is.
Think about how we usually operate. We talk to people starting out in business or, developers coding a new app or writers working on a manuscript.
Yeah, all the time.
And they almost universally treat posting their work online as this tedious, soul-sucking marketing chore.
Like it's a necessary evil.
Exactly. Oh, I have to update my blog today, or I have to post to my feed to appease the algorithm. We view it as a burden.
That's a burden.
But the story of Roger Ebert completely dismantles that cynical view.
It does.
It shows us that expression is not a marketing tactic. It is a profound privilege.
A privilege, yes.
To have a voice, to have the platforms available to use it, and to be physically able to share your mind with the world, that is a gift.
It forces a mirror up to your own reluctance, doesn't it?
It really does.
Because you have the physical ability to speak. You have the digital infrastructure available to you instantly.
It's right in our pockets.
You have a voice, both literally and metaphorically. And yet, so often, you might choose to remain silent out of fear.
Fear or perfectionism.
Or this misplaced idea that you aren't ready.
Right.
Roger Ebert, who had his physical voice violently stolen from him, fought tooth and nail to maintain his digital voice, his written voice, because he recognized that expression is existence.
Expression is existence.
If you do not express yourself, in the eyes of the broader world, you simply do not exist.
Which means the next time you hesitate to share your work, the next time you were staring at that publish button and feeling that wave of imposter syndrome,
You need to think of Ebert.
you have to think of Ebert. Sharing your ideas, your messy process, your unpolished passions is your way of confirming your existence in the world.
Yes.
It is your way of planting a flag and saying, I am here,
Right.
my mind is working, And this is what I care about.
To not squander that opportunity because you are worried about the paint not being dry yet.
Exactly.
And this realization about existence leads directly into one of the most provocative and frankly challenging statements Kleon makes in this entire text.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
It's a statement that builds on Ebert's philosophy, but applies it to the cold, hard reality of modern career building. He says, and I quote, "In this day and age, if your work isn't online, it doesn't exist."
So what does this all mean? Like, is it really that black and white? If it isn't online, it doesn't exist.
It sounds harsh.
It sounds incredibly harsh. I can easily imagine people getting incredibly defensive hearing that.
Oh, for sure.
A master woodworker might say, well, my furniture's real, whether I post it on Instagram or not.
Right.
Or a brilliant back-end developer might say, my code runs the servers. It exists whether I tweet about it or not. It sounds almost aggressive to tell someone their private work doesn't exist.
It does sound extreme, and Kleon acknowledges the inherent tension in that statement.
Okay, so how does he explain it?
To fully grasp why he says this, we have to look at the conflict he explores between two very different philosophies of success.
Okay.
The text introduces a highly influential, very famous piece of advice from the legendary comedian Steve Martin.
Oh yeah, the Steve Martin quote.
Right. Whenever aspiring creatives would ask Steve Martin, how do I get my stuff out there? How do I get an agent? How do I get noticed?
The classic questions.
Martin would famously dodge the self-promotion question entirely by giving them a mantra. He'd say, be so good they can't ignore you.
Which is such a deeply seductive piece of advice, isn't it?
It really is.
It is exactly what our egos want to hear. Be so good they can't ignore you. It tells us that we don't have to do the scary, vulnerable work of putting ourselves out there.
Exactly. It lets you off the hook.
It validates the romantic myth of the hidden genius. It tells us we can just, retreat into our caves, lock the door, work in absolute isolation.
Perfect your craft over a decade.
Yeah. Perfect it in secret, and eventually, the sheer undeniable brilliance of our work will act like a gravitational pull, just drawing the entire world to our doorstep.
It gives us permission to hide.
It totally gives us permission to hide.
Exactly. It appeals to our deep-seated desire for absolute secrecy. It protects us from criticism while we work.
So we never have to feel vulnerable.
Right. And Kleon is nuanced here. He actually agrees with Martin to an extent.
Okay, so he's not saying Steve Martin is totally wrong.
No, not totally. If you focus intensely on getting really good at your craft, the quality of your work will eventually be a massive asset. People will eventually come to you.
Right. Quality matters.
And this is the crucial mechanical caveat that changes the entire equation.
A big but.
Kleon adds, in order to be found, you have to be findable.
In order to be found, you have to be findable. That one sentence completely bursts the bubble of Steve Martin's hidden genius.
It dismantles it entirely.
It really does.
Because Steve Martin's advice relies on a flawed premise regarding how the modern world actually routes attention.
Okay, unpack that.
Martin's advice implies that quality alone generates its own visibility.
Like it just emits a signal by being good.
Right. But Kleon is pointing out the mechanical reality of networks. You could be in your cubicle or your private studio producing the most brilliant, groundbreaking, revolutionary work in the history of your field.
The best ever.
But if you are maintaining absolute secrecy, how can anyone possibly ignore you?
Right. You can't be ignored if you are invisible.
Exactly.
To be ignored, someone first has to be aware of your presence and then consciously choose to look away.
They have to see you first to ignore you.
Yes. If you are hidden, you aren't being ignored. You are a non-entity. You are absent from the board entirely. You aren't giving the world the chance to ignore you, let alone admire you.
That is spot on. The text creates this brilliant contrast between two specific modes of operating.
The hoarder and the sharer.
Exactly. On one hand, you have the hoarder. The person cranking away in absolute secrecy, hoarding their knowledge, waiting for a grand theatrical reveal that, statistically speaking, may never come.
The big reveal that nobody shows up for.
Right. On the other hand, you have the people who are actually thriving in the modern landscape.
And Kleon notes something very specific about those people who are thriving, right?
He does. He observes that almost all the people he looks up to have built sharing into their daily routine.
It's part of the process.
They aren't out schmoozing at cocktail parties. In fact, they're usually too busy actually working to do traditional networking.
They're not handing out business cards.
No. But instead of hiding, they are consistently posting bits and pieces of their work, their process, and their learning online. They are taking advantage of the network.
The distinction between networking and the network is so vital here.
Oh, it's a huge difference.
Because the old way, networking is a verb, it's exhausting.
Very
It's
exhausting.
putting on a suit, going to a mixer, handing out those business cards, and trying to force artificial connections with strangers. It feels so transactional.
It feels fake a lot of the time.
Yeah. But taking advantage of the network as a noun, as an infrastructure, is entirely different.
How so?
It means generously sharing your knowledge, your half-baked ideas, your process into the digital ether. And by doing that, you organically build an audience of like-minded people.
It does the work for you.
Right. But to access the power of that network, you have to put an input into it. A network cannot route traffic to a node that isn't emitting a signal.
And the excuse people usually use to avoid emitting that signal is that they don't have the right equipment yet.
Oh, always with the equipment.
Which leads us to one of the most profound metaphors in the text. The John Lennon tuba quote.
The tuba quote. I love this.
Lennon said, "I'm an artist, man. Give me a tuba and I'll get you something out of it."
I just love the visual of that.
It's a great visual.
Think about a tuba. It is loud, it is bulky, it is dented, it is brass. It is not a refined, delicate instrument like a Stradivarius violin.
It's inherently a bit ridiculous.
It is. But Lennon's point is that the tool itself is irrelevant to the drive of the artist.
Exactly.
People get so hopelessly bogged down in the logistics of sharing. I can't start my consulting business until my website is absolutely flawless.
I need a perfect logo.
I can't share my writing until I have a custom domain and a professionally designed logo. I can't film my process until I buy a cinematic 4K camera and studio lighting.
They're waiting for the perfect setup.
They are essentially waiting for a grand piano to be delivered to their living room, professionally tuned, before they will permit themselves to play a single note.
And meanwhile, John Lennon is standing there saying, "Hand me that dented tuba and I will blow into it until a melody comes out."
Yes, if we connect this to the bigger picture of findability, the tuba represents whatever imperfect tools you have at your disposal right this exact second.
It represents the messy, unpolished reality of just getting your ideas out of your head and into the world.
It's an embrace of the present moment, with all its limitations, over a hypothesized perfect future that will never arrive.
Because that perfect future never does arrive.
Never. If you want to be findable, you cannot wait for the grand piano. You have to start making music with the tuba today.
This is a massive wake-up call for a lot of people.
It really is. It means you cannot just put your head down, do good work in the dark, and hope the universe magically rewards your silent brilliance.
The universe doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. You have an active daily obligation to make yourself discoverable. You have to leave breadcrumbs.
Breadcrumbs, yes.
A tweet about a problem you solved, a photo of a messy sketch, a quick blog post about a failure. If you aren't leaving those breadcrumbs online, you are actively choosing not to exist in the professional or creative landscape.
But of course, knowing logically that you have an obligation to be findable and actually having the courage to execute it, those are two very different things.
Very.
And the text does not ignore this. It directly addresses the massive psychological hurdle that stops people from leaving those breadcrumbs.
Yes, the ultimate fear. The terrifying thought that races through your head right before your finger clicks publish or post.
We all know it.
We do.
Yeah.
And that thought is always some variation of, I'm not an expert yet.
Who am I to share this?
Exactly. Who am I to share this? I don't know everything about this field. There are people out there with PhDs with decades of experience.
The real experts.
Right. If I speak up now, people will see the gaps in my knowledge. They will see that I'm just a beginner, and they will judge me.
It is the paralyzing grip of imposter syndrome.
It really is.
It is the fear of being exposed. Because we live in a culture that worships expertise.
We do. We reward the people who know it all.
But the text offers an incredibly liberating, counterintuitive solution to this fear.
What's the solution?
The solution is forget about being an expert entirely.
Just forget about it.
Stop trying to masquerade as a professional before your time. Instead, wholeheartedly embrace being an amateur.
Okay, let's unpack this word, amateur. Because in the business world, and in our culture generally, amateur is almost always used as an insult.
It has a very negative connotation.
Right. Oh, that presentation was so amateurish. They run their business like amateurs. We equate it with incompetence, sloppiness, and a lack of seriousness.
We think of it as bad work.
Yeah. So if I am trying to build a career, why on earth would I want to brand myself as an amateur? What potential clients or audience members just go find a pro?
To understand why Kleon champions this, we have to look at the actual root of the word, which the text explicitly points out.
The root of the word amateur.
Yes. Kleon advises us to wear your amateurism on your sleeve, and he defines that amateurism with two specific words in parentheses: your heart, your love.
Your heart, your love.
Right. This is because the word amateur comes from the Latin word amator, which literally translates to lover.
Oh, wow. Amateur.
An amateur, in the truest sense of the word, is someone who pursues a discipline out of pure love, genuine curiosity, and enthusiasm, rather than for money, professional status, or ego.
Wear your amateurism, your heart, your love on your sleeve. That framing changes the entire dynamic of sharing.
It completely flips it.
Because if you are an expert, your sharing is often performative.
You're defending your territory.
Exactly. You are sharing to prove how smart you are, to defend your status, to show that you hold the high ground. But if you share as an amateur, you aren't trying to prove anything.
You have nothing to prove.
You are simply sharing to show how much you care about the subject.
And this raises an important question. What is the actual strategic advantage of being an amateur in a world full of experts?
Yeah, why is it better?
The text tells us that the best way to get started is to make a commitment to learning in front of others.
Learning in public.
Yes. Think about the psychological burden of the expert. When you are an established expert, there is an immense pressure to be infallible.
You can't make mistakes.
There is a rigidity. You can't ask basic questions because it might damage your brand.
Right, people will think you're a fraud.
Exactly. But when you are an amateur, you are completely free. You have zero prestige to protect.
You can just play.
You can experiment wildly, you can fail publicly, you can openly admit when you are confused, you can look at what the experts in a scene are doing, pay attention to what they are sharing, and more importantly, notice what they are not sharing.
Yes, the text mentions looking for voids.
Voids.
It says to be on the lookout for voids that you can fill with your own efforts, no matter how bad they are at first.
That's a great point.
I think about this in terms of technical writing or tutorials, right? Often, an expert will write a guide on how to code something. But because they are an expert, they skip over steps 2 and 3 because those steps are obvious to them.
They assume you just know it.
Right. But to a beginner, steps 2 and 3 are a brick wall. The void is the missing steps.
And the amateur can fill that void.
The amateur can come in, stumble through steps 2 and 3, and then write a messy, unpolished blog post about how they finally figured it out.
Yes. You don't have to be better than the experts.
You just have to be willing to explore the empty spaces they had forgotten about. And the text explicitly gives you permission to do it poorly,
Right.
it says, no matter how bad they are at first.
It is permission to be human.
Yeah.
And from an audience-building perspective, it is wildly effective.
Why is it so effective?
Because human beings are naturally drawn to authenticity and narrative. We are often intimidated by unapproachable, flawless experts. They seem distant.
They feel like a textbook.
Right. But we actively root for the passionate amateur. We want to see the struggle, the learning curve, the genuine, unfiltered curiosity.
It's the behind-the-scenes documentary effect.
Ah, that's a perfect analogy.
Think about movies.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the 2-hour documentary about the chaotic, disastrous process of making the movie is infinitely more engaging than the polished, finalized movie itself.
Oh, definitely.
Because in the documentary, you see the raw human effort. You see the machinery breaking down and people trying to fix it.
You see the real work.
People love connecting with others who share their genuine enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
If you are deeply, passionately, almost embarrassingly nerdy about a very specific topic, and you share that enthusiasm openly without pretending to be a master of it, it acts as a beacon.
And the text gives very clear, practical advice on how to protect this amateur spirit.
Okay, what is it?
It says, don't worry, for now, about how you'll make money or build a career off it.
It's hard to do.
It is hard. But the moment you introduce the pressure of monetization or professional expectation, you risk silencing the genuine voice of the amateur.
You start calculating instead of expressing.
Exactly. Forget the professional expectations. Share what you love today. If you do that consistently, the people who love the exact same things will find you.
Your true audience.
Your true audience will assemble around that shared passion, not around a fake veneer of expertise.
So if you are listening to this right now, feeling that pressure, here is your permission slip to take the pressure off.
Take a breath.
Stop pretending you have all the answers. Document your messy learning process. If you read a dense, difficult book in your industry, share your confused, half-baked notes.
Put them out there.
If you are trying to build a new piece of software and the server keeps crashing, share the bug reports, share your frustration, but also share why you love the puzzle of trying to fix it.
Exactly.
Your amateurism, your vulnerability is not a weakness that needs to be hidden. It is your ultimate superpower for building genuine human connection.
We have covered a vast amount of philosophical and practical ground today.
We really have.
We moved from the internal psychological anxieties of the lost car keys to the external mechanical realities of the digital network and the tuba.
The tuba.
We looked at the profound urgency of Roger Ebert and the strategic humility of the amateur. If we step back and synthesize all these distinct threads, the true soul of this chapter becomes brilliantly clear.
Let's bring it all together. If we had to distill this entire discussion into a single, grand, unified theory of Chapter 4, what is it?
The central insight is this. Your voice is not a prerequisite for sharing. It is the reward for sharing.
The reward. I love that.
We saw this most vividly with the profound physical and existential reality of Roger Ebert. Expression is not a luxury or a marketing tactic.
No, it's not.
It is a fundamental necessity for existence. He wrote to live. When we combine that relentless life-or-death drive to exist with the humble, open-hearted approach of the amateur learning in public, we realize that the entire concept of finding your voice is a myth designed to keep us safe.
It's an excuse to hide.
Exactly. You don't find it under a rock. Finding your voice is simply the act of joining the choir. It is stepping up, taking whatever flawed instrument you have, even if it's a dented tuba, and playing a note. Action creates existence.
Action creates existence.
Yeah.
If you take away only one philosophical shift from this entire deep dive, let it be that. You do not exist in your field, in your art, or in your industry until you act.
Until you share.
Until you broadcast your signal into the oven of the world. You find the voice by using the voice.
And to leave you with a final thought to mull over, I want to pull one more quote from the text.
Okay, let's hear it.
This one is from the legendary John Cleese. He said, "Creativity is not a talent. It is a way of operating."
A way of operating. I love the mechanical nature of that phrasing.
Exactly. If creativity is just a way of operating, then your voice isn't a final destination.
It's not an endpoint.
It isn't a trophy you win, polish, and put on a shelf, believing you have your voice forever. It is a living, breathing operation. It is an engine, and you have to consciously, deliberately choose to power up that engine every single day.
You have to keep walking out to the garage and starting the car. But the beautiful thing is, now we know the keys were never lost.
They were there all along.
They were sitting in the ignition the whole time. We just had to have the courage to turn them. But now that we know we must share our work to exist, and we know we must operate this creative engine daily, it raises a terrifying, highly practical question.
Oh, yes, it does.
How do we actually do it without ruining our lives? How do we show the messy, unpolished process behind our work without totally oversharing, becoming a complete nuisance to our network, and embarrassing ourselves professionally?
It's a fine line.
That exact tension, the razor-thin line between essential sharing and toxic oversharing, is exactly what we will leave you to think about until our next deep dive.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.